Welcome to History for the Tired. Here, we journey through the hidden folds of time, telling stories not merely to inform, but to soothe, to settle, to spark gentle wonder as you drift into rest. There's much more to come. Tonight, we begin a tale wrapped in ancient secrecy, whispered through centuries. The story of the 9 unknown men of Ashoka. If you're ready for stories that help you sleep while feeding your curiosity, born to Emperor Binjasara and a lesser queen, Subhadrangi, Ashoka was never destined for the throne. He was intelligent, yes, and ambitious, undoubtedly. But in the vast machinery of the Mauryan court, he was a blade kept sheathed in till the time came to unsheath it. Section 1. The Emperor and the Aftermath. Before the 9, there was Ashoka, not the peaceful monarch of later lore, not the contemplative patron of Dharma, whose edicts carved compassion into rock. Kalinga stood for defiance. Its merchants, its soldiers, its kings they had resisted incorporation into the great Mauryan fold. Imagine, instead, the crack of war elephants, the scream of arrows in the wind, the tremor of the ground as phalanxes collided, villages torched, rivers red, children wailing for mothers who would never rise again. That resistance was a thorn in the imperial spine. For Ashoka, now emperor, it became more than policy. It became destiny. Legend tells us that he walked the battlefield alone, ankle-deep in blood. He looked into the faces of the dead and saw not enemies, but echoes, brothers, sisters, sons, daughters. No, in the beginning, there was only a man forged in blood. It birthed fear. It is easy to forget that Ashoka, the Great, the third ruler of the Mauryan dynasty, began his rule in shadows, both political and personal. If war could annihilate so easily, what other knowledge might be misused? What secrets had the ancients uncovered, secrets that could tilt the axis of the world if fallen into the wrong hands? Ashoka's transformation was not sudden, but it was profound. He turned to the teachings of the Buddha not just as religion, but as refuge. He renounced violence. His edicts proclaimed love, patience, and respect for all living beings. He banned animal sacrifice. He advocated for tolerance among faiths. Hospitals were built, wells dug, trees planted for weary travelers. This is Kalingan independent kingdom, nestled between the Ganges Delta and the forests of the Eastern Ghats. A proud realm, unconquered even by Chandragupta Maurya, Ashoka's own grandfather. The court of Pataliputra, capital of the Mauryan Empire, was no cradle of virtue. It was a den of tigers, aswhirl with whispers and schemes. Spies walked like ghosts, ministers murmured behind peacock feather fans, and brothers eyed one another with venom hidden behind smiles. Ashoka, cast into this crucible, became steel. He fought in Takshashila. He crushed revolts. His methods were efficient, merciless. Soldiers followed him with fear. Provinces fell silent in his wake. He earned a title, Chanda Shokatha. To each he entrusted a book, ranging from psychological warfare to microbiology, communication to alchemy. The contents of these books were meant to be protected, hidden, refined, and never misused. And yet, the crown remained distant until the Kalinga War. Let us pause here for a moment in this fertile valley beside the Daya River, where peacocks cry in the underbrush and the scent of mango trees lingers in the air. It was not a matter of conquest alone. The campaign was swift, brutal. Over 100,000 men are said to have died. The numbers are staggering, but numbers do not bleed. The Daya River, whose name means compassion, bore silent witness. And then Stilin's victory was Ashoka's, but it brought no joy. In that moment, the man known as the cruel Ashoka began to crumble. Here lies the hinge of history. But this transformation birthed more than just policies. For Ashoka, now painfully aware of humanity's capacity for destruction, began to ask darker questions. This, many believe, was the genesis of the Nine, the concept whispered in Brahmin scrolls and echoed in colonial-era folklore, is this. Ashoka gathered 9 men, each a master of a particular domain of knowledge. Who were these 9? Their identities were never made public. Some say they were monks. Others say they were scientists, philosophers, even spies. What matters is the idea, a secret society, sanctioned by the emperor himself, tasked with guarding the most dangerous truths of civilization. One book was said to contain the secrets of propaganda, the art of manipulating public opinion. Another contained the methods of killing with a mere touch, perhaps an early understanding of pressure points or toxins. One held knowledge of communication, perhaps even technologies that would not be reinvented for millennia. Another was said to explore the structure of matter, hints of atomic theory, long before modern chemistry. One volume supposedly held secrets of invisibility and optical sciences, dealing with the manipulation of light and perception. And then there was the book of extraterrestrial studies, an idea so anachronistic, it's often dismissed as modern fiction retroactively applied. Yet legends remain. Each of the 9 guarded one of these domains, refining and updating the information in secret, generation after generation. The 9 were not static. They were fluid, evolving across the centuries, yet always bound by a sacred oath. The knowledge must not be used to dominate or destroy. He had lived it, wielded it, and recoiled in its aftermath. By creating the 9, he sought to protect the world from itself. In their place rose a softer form of statecraft, one that relied on ethical example, not the sword. This was a man who had seen hell and tried to plant gardens over its ashes. Picture him, now a man who has seen too much. He walks a quiet garden in Pataliputra, no longer a battlefield, but a sanctuary. A scroll rests in his hand, unmarked by royal seal or decree. It is the record of the 9, a brief note to future generations. Guard this wisdom, not to rule, but to shield. Share it only when the world is ready to heal. Ashoka's fears were not unfounded. He knew the fragility of morality when power becomes intoxicating. Arab scholars hinted at conversations with men who knew languages never spoken aloud. In 1923, Talbot Mundy, a British author, would write of the 9 in his novel, The 9 Unknown. It was fiction, but like many fictions, rooted in older truth. Their power is not in what they wield, but in what they withhold. In the coming centuries, strange rumors surfaced. Roman travelers whispered of dark-robed figures in India who could transmute metals. Even the French general Louis Jacqueliot, stationed in India during the 19th century, wrote of the 9's ancient manuscripts said to contain cures for every disease and instructions on interstellar travel. Ashoka's transformation also changed the tone of governance. Gone were the spectacles of imperial cruelty. Still, his fears never fully abated. He knew that ideas were as dangerous as weapons and more enduring. He had begun as a conqueror. He died as a guardian. So we return once more to Ashoka near the end of his life. And so begins a legacy hidden behind veils of time, secrecy, and silence. The 9 unknown men were born not of ambition, but of remorse. Their story continues. The story of the 9 unknown men would be a myth, a bedtime tale spun from ancient smokif, not for the books. For centuries, whispered across monsoon-washed temples and Fugal scrolls buried in neglected archives, there existed tales, not merely of the men, but of what they guarded. 9 sacred volumes, each one containing knowledge, so potent, so dangerous, that releasing even a single page could unmake civilization. These were not tomes of devotion, nor chronicles of dynasties. These were instructions for creating, controlling, destroying, and more terrifyingly, understanding. Ashoka, tormented by the aftermath of war, did not gather these 9 out of idle curiosity. He built them like a fortress, a secret society, not for conquest, but containment. That man would read it, master it, and dedicate his life not to exploiting its contents, but to guarding it, adding to it where needed, refining it as understanding evolved. And when he grew old, the burden would be passed to a chosen successor. Not a family member, not a student, a soul tested and proven worthy. And so the chain would continue, unbroken, until the world was ready. Of how minds bend when spoken to in the right rhythm, tone, or symbol. Not to exploit for healing, but for disabling or killing quickly and silently. It contained case studies of entire villages made to believe lies, armies turned by whispers, religions born from carefully planted metaphors, techniques that seem supernatural but are simply lost science. The 9, it is said, refined and tested these methods. Instructions for purification, herbal recipes for sterilization, quarantine practices, centuries before the word existed. Not to use, but to understand, so that such knowledge wouldn't fall into unworthy hands. When asked his source, he simply said, "From an old scroll my grandfather protected," because what he had seen on the fields of Kalinga had awakened something in him, the realization that power was never the enemy. Ashoka's edicts, carved into stone pillars across the subcontinent, carried messages not just of compassion, but of psychological precision. The iron pillar of Delhi, which has not rusted in 1600 years. Others whisper, the book of communication. The 9 were not mere chemists, they were preservers of industrial science, far beyond their era. The shape of the letters, the meter of the lines, everything calibrated for maximum influence. In the ruins of ancient temples like Kailasa in Elaru, structures carved from solid rock, some researchers suspect lost techniques of levitation or weight manipulation. The book, it is said, held formulas describing the breath of earth and the soft hand that holds what falls. Tales from the Gupta period reference sages who could vanish from sight by bending light, instructions for devices that could store sunlight or predict eclipses with uncanny precision. Some say it hinted at perpetual motion, not magic, a lensing technique, a cloak of refractive fabric. But there are records of monks in far-flung monasteries receiving imperial commands long before messengers could have arrived. It was knowledge, divorced from wisdom, unmoored from restraint. Each book, legend says, was entrusted to one man. But what were these books? What knowledge did they contain? It contained, perhaps, the formulas of history itself, how to predict the future, not with stars, but with patterns of human behavior. The first was the book of propaganda. This was not the petty leaflet-making of revolutions or the chest-thumping declarations of emperors. This was a study of mass psychology, of language as weapons. Some say the earliest campaigns of Dharma across India peaceful, elegant, persuasive were born from techniques in this book. The second book was the Book of Physiology and Death. Skeptics argue that no physical trace of these books has ever been found. No vault, no scroll, no stone slab engraved with dangerous truths. It sounds dramatic, but what if you could kill a man with a touch? This book reportedly explored every aspect of human biology: circulation, nerve points, pressure thresholds, toxic plants, and even emotional triggers. Martial arts across Asa from Kaleri in India to Dimmak in China carry traces of this knowledge. The third was the Book of Microbiology. Long before microscopes, this book described germs, not in modern terms, but in metaphor, invisible seeds of disease carried in breath and water. In 1818, an unknown Indian physician in Calcutta successfully treated cholera using a method eerily similar to modern hydration therapies, something not found in known medical texts of the time. The fourth book was the Book of Alchemy and Metallurgy. It detailed transmutation, turning base metals into gold, perhaps, but also the creation of alloys lost to time. Damascus steel. Ashoka, some believe, wanted India to develop weapons to match any future invader, but never to be used unless the empire was threatened by extinction. The fifth book was the Book of Communication. This is one of the most hotly debated. It supposedly described how to communicate across great distance, possibly even across species. Early radio theory, ultrasonic transmission, perhaps. Modern researchers call it coincidence. The sixth book explored gravity and anti-gravity. Imagine a civilization that could lift stone blocks without pulleys or elephants. Science fiction, perhaps. But this is the nine where the line between myth and engineering blurs. The seventh book, the Book of Cosmology and Light, dealt with optics, invisibility, and the manipulation of perception. The eighth book concerned energy and time, descriptions of solar power, the movement of planetary bodies, not just as celestial events, but as timekeeping devices. And the ninth, most mysterious, was the Book of Sociology. This was the crown jewel. It described the rise and fall of civilizations, how revolts begin, how harmony is broken, how societies decay from within. It is said that the nine used this book to shape India's political transitions, to guide reforms without ever revealing themselves. 9 books, 9 men, 9 burdens, heavier than any empire. And yet, the question remains, did these books ever truly exist? Or are they symbols? Allegories of India's intellectual heritage disguised as fable. But that, perhaps, is the point. Because if they had been found, would we still be here to ask? The 9 were not passive readers. They were custodians, scribes, scientists, and sentinels. If the legends are true, then their role was not simply to preserve the knowledge entrusted to them, but to test it, update it, and prepare it for a time when humanity might be ready to handle such power without succumbing to it. The secret society was not immortal, but continuous, its membership passed down from one chosen guardian to another. They worked in secrecy, sometimes apart, sometimes in collaboration, convening in hidden places under moonless skies, forests, ancient libraries, deep caves along forgotten rivers. They would report their observations, challenge one another's hypotheses, refine theories. The Surya Siddhanta, composed around the 4th or 5th century CE, contains planetary models and calculations that remained accurate for over 1,000 years. Mainstream history credits this to collective scholarly achievement. but whispers in certain circles suggest otherwise, that these observations were not original, but inherited from one of the nine. This wasn't hereditary, nor did it follow institutional lines. The pigments used in their murals resist decay, even today, watching what humanity did with little sparks of the forbidden. Scientists examining the walls have admitted confusion over how such durable dyes were made without access to modern chemistry. Could this knowledge have briefly slipped from the Book of Alchemy, tested in stone, then quietly withdrawn? A successor could be a monk from Nalanda, a wandering philosopher, a village healer, or a silent linguist cloaked in scholarly obscurity. What mattered was discipline, integrity, the ability to carry knowledge without wielding it as a weapon. But readiness is a dangerous word. He attempted to recreate a technique known as the death pulse, a touch designed to induce heart failure in less than 60 seconds. His experiment worked on his own brother. Horrified, he fled to the Vindhya mountains and was never seen again. That manuscript, some say, vanished shortly thereafter. Some believe the nine reclaimed it. The ingredients match modern quinine. The sailor survived. The healer vanished. Perhaps one of them was cloaked in the saffron robes of a Buddhist monk. How were they stored? How did they survive? Another may have disguised himself as a Jain merchant. A third, an advisor to a local Raja who never spoke at court but whose counsel was always followed, who decides when humanity is ready. Archaeological restrictions have prevented further digging. In the 9th century, accounts from Persian travelers mention a sect in South India that could transmit messages across long distances using mirrored panels and coded symbols well before the concept of semaphore had reached Europe. It worked too well. Others insist they were encoded in copper plates or preserved in crystalline tablets, locked in hidden vaults across India's vast terrain. Their goal was never to unlock the secrets of the universe, but to ensure those secrets didn't fall into hands too eager to exploit, too impatient to understand the consequences. It's said to be guarded by a sect of mute monks who serve not any deity, but a principle. That which is known is not always meant to be shared. Regional kings attempted to weaponize the technique for espionage, and then mysteriously it vanished from history. To understand the Nine's legacy, one must also understand their process. Each guardian was entrusted with their respective book, bound by an oath, never to reveal its full contents outside the circle of nine. They were the quiet pulse behind some of India's most curious bursts of knowledge. Take, for instance, the astronomical precision of ancient Indian calendars. Consider the sudden appearance of surgical texts attributed to Sutta, describing procedures as complex as cataract removal and plastic surgery. While these texts are marvels of early medical insight, some believe they may have drawn from older, undocumented scrolls, hidden knowledge reintroduced in fragments by those tasked with guarding the second book. And then there are the strange anomalies, technologies and techniques that seem to erupt in isolated brilliance, only to vanish again without explanation. The Ajanta caves, for example, carved between the 2nd century BCE and the 6th century CE. They are marvels of architecture, acoustics, and artistic composition. If so, then the nine were not just keepers, they were curators, testing the world, nudging it. But these tests were not without risk. One legend, found in the decaying pages of a Tamil manuscript held by a forgotten temple library, tells of a scholar named Giri Kenta who gained access to a fragment of the Book of Physiology. Even the Book of Communication had its dangers. If the 9 allowed knowledge to leak, it was always intentional and always temporary. They may have appeared throughout history under different names, blending into the ebb and flow of religious and scholarly movements. What's striking is how often these men appear, not in the foreground of historical texts, but in the margins. Footnotes mention a nameless sage advising Chandragupta to Mughal records speak of a southern scholar whose calculations predicted a lunar eclipse 3 years in advance, without using Persian star charts. A Portuguese sailor, in his journal from 1522, describes being rescued from malaria near Goa by a native healer who used a bitter tonic, coincidence or the quiet intervention of one of the 9. Then there's the matter of the books themselves. Here, too, the legends multiply. Some believe the books were made of a material stronger than paper etched into palm leaf composites, layered with resin, capable of surviving centuries in tropical climates. One popular legend among tantric circles speaks of the Chitra Bandaratha, hidden libraries, supposedly located deep beneath a temple in a river. In modern times, this tale might sound absurd, but explorers have noted unusual architectural designs in these temples' ventilation shafts that go nowhere. Chambers sealed behind walls with no doors, perhaps wisely so. The 9, after all, were never protectors of the past. They were custodians of the future. Their motto, it is said, was simple: truth is not forbidden, only its misuse. If we peer beyond the veils of time and myth, the 9 books attributed to Ashoka's secret order are more than relics of ancient curiosity. They represent entire worlds of knowledge, each self-contained, yet interlinked realms of immense potential, both creative and destructive. In many ways, they're maps to futures we haven't yet reached. Let us walk through them, one by one, not as scientists or historians, but as dreamers quietly threading the line between speculation and memory. 1. The first book, Psychological Warfare. The first and perhaps most feared volume is said to concern psychological warfare, not merely the study of manipulation, but the science of mental influence on a mass scale. It examined how belief systems could be shaped, how fear could be stoked, how entire cultures could be bent not by the sword, but by suggestion. This book may have detailed early versions of crowd control, mass hypnosis, or what we now call propaganda. Ancient rulers have always known the power of symbols, of colors, flags, and rituals, but this book supposedly formalized such techniques into a codified system. Some claim the 9 knew of sterilization techniques, vaccination concepts, and bacterial cultures. Here lay the infamous touch of death, a pressure technique believed to stop a heart or paralyze limbs. While some interpret this as esoteric martial arts knowledge akin to Kalarapayattu or Dim Mak, others see in it an early study of bioelectric fields, reflex arcs, and neurochemical triggers. There's an eerie resonance with modern CRISPR technology, as if the roots of our scientific tree were already sprouting in ancient soil. Within 2 generations, that story was accepted as ancestral truth. Entire lineages were created around it. And then when the experiment ended, the festival slowly faded, leaving behind a legend no one could trace. Perhaps a compound similar to modern stimulants or psychedelics, used in extreme moderation by meditating monks to peer beyond the veil. Yet the 9 were said to possess a manual on true alchemical processes. It's said to contain not only the keys to all earthly languages, living and dead, but systems of nonverbal, symbolic, and even telepathic communication. Unlike European alchemists, often shrouded in mysticism, the Nine approached it scientifically, whether metaphorical or literal. This aspect has given rise to all manner of speculation, linking the Nine to everything from UFO sightings to divine visions in Indian epics. There are whispers that the Nine once tested its effects by introducing a new festival in a remote Regenan event celebrating a fictitious hero, and thought through physical touch or posture how to calm anger or stoke panic just by manipulating breath or spine alignment. This book supposedly delved into the mechanics of gravity, planetary orbits, and flight. But even today, some aerospace theorists raise eyebrows at the engineering implications in those old designs. Echoes of this knowledge linger today in acupuncture, yoga, and certain therapeutic massage forms. Some scholars argue these are symbolic, but the legend of the sixth book insists otherwise, that the Nine had working models, or at least blueprints, for flying machines far ahead of their time. Mirrors, prisms, fiber optics, and cloaking effects have all been linked loosely and controversially to this arcane volume. Another tale speaks of sun mirrors used to flash encoded messages over miles. 2. The second book, Physiology and the Deadly Touch. The second book dealt with the human body, not to heal, but to harm. More intriguingly, this book may have contained information about how to influence emotion. Thus, the knowledge remained tightly bound within the Nine, to be used sparingly and with great moral caution. 3. The third book, Microbiology and Biotechnology. It is said to be a chronicle of possible futures, outcomes, and probabilities based on all the other 8 books combined. Others claim it is mystical concerned with karma, destiny, and the soul's journey. Or worse, to tempt a man into trying to change what should never be changed. Art or something else. Centuries before germ theory emerged in Europe, this book was said to describe invisible agents of disease, how they spread, how they could be harnessed, and how they might be cured. There is speculation that Ashoka used this book as a blueprint when he transitioned the Mauryan camper into one guided by Buddhist values. Legends tell of healers in southern India who could cure fever with fermented plant extracts prepared in elaborate rituals under moonlight. Tonics that modern biologists suspect may have included primitive antibiotics. The book may also have contained the knowledge of poisons, antidotes, and even rudimentary gene editing using natural enzymes. 4. The fourth book, Alchemy and Transmutation. The dream of alchemy and turning base metals into gold, prolonging life, summoning elixirs, was not unique to India. Some interpret this book as containing early metallurgical knowledge, how to strengthen iron, how to create alloys impervious to rust, or how to distill substances with medical or lethal properties. There are even stories of liquid sunlight, a potion that, when consumed, induced extreme energy, hallucinations, or prophetic visions. 5. The fifth book, Communication, Terrestrial, and Beyond. This book may be the most mysterious of them all. One legend claims that the Nine developed a method of transferring thought patterns through complex visual mandalas, akin to optical coding. And then there are the truly bizarre accounts that the book contained knowledge of communicating with non-human intelligences, or celestial beings. 6. The sixth book, Gravitation and Motion. Long before Newton, the concept of force, motion, and attraction fascinated Indian philosophers. Sanskrit texts, like the Vaimanika Shastra, though often dismissed as pseudoscientific, describe aircraft of various types powered by thought, mercury, solar energy, or mantras. Whether these were metaphorical representations of astral travel or literal technologies is unknown. 7. The seventh book, Cosmology and Light. This book explored the nature of the cosmos, not just stars and planets, but the properties of light, the bending of rays, and the structure of space itself. It may have anticipated concepts akin to relativity or quantum light behavior. Some historians point to the uncanny optical illusions carved into certain Indian temples, statues that disappear from one angle, corridors that reflect sounds across great distances. 8. The eighth book, Sociology and Civilization. This volume may be the most philosophical. It supposedly analyzed the rise and fall of civilizations, mapping how cultures are born, how they peak, and what causes their eventual decline. It offered models for sustainable governance, ethics-based economies, and peaceful coexistence. In more cynical hands, the book could also be used to collapse a culture by predicting its fault lines and exploiting them. 9. The ninth book, Prophecy and the Tides of Time. The final book, if it exists, is a paradox. Some interpret this as a form of deep historical modeling, using psychology, biology, physics, and sociology to simulate potential global events. Whether scientific or spiritual, it was regarded as the most sacred and dangerous of the books because it had the power not just to explain the world, but to influence it. These books were more than texts. They were the blueprints of reality, shards of godlike understanding, entrusted not to the masses, but to 9 weary shoulders. And yet, if they have survived, they may still be among us, hidden in monasteries, encoded in sculpture, or carried quietly by people who look just like us, waiting for the day when their contents are needed or feared. The fourth book of the 9 is said to have been devoted to alchemy and the transmutation of metals. On the surface, this might seem like a reflection of the old medieval obsession with turning base metals into gold. However, in the context of the 9 unknown, this book may have encompassed something far more sophisticated than simple metallurgical magic. Instead, it could have contained advanced knowledge about chemistry, material science, and the manipulation of molecular structures, concepts that, while far beyond the scientific grasp of Ashoka's time, were nonetheless imagined and encoded by a society centuries ahead of its contemporaries. Let us journey into this imagined or perhaps remembered realm of elemental transformation. Imagine a manuscript hand-copied on treated palm leaves, its text written in an ancient derivative of Brahmi script, visible only under a particular spectrum of light. There are whispers, long dismissed as fable, that the 9 had formulas to create rare or unstable substances through artificial means. This could imply an understanding of chemical reactions and compound formation centuries ahead of Lavoisier or Mendeleev. Modern scientists have analyzed the pillar and concluded that its resistance to corrosion is due to the high phosphorus content in the iron and the absence of sulfur and magnesium. But how did the ancient metallurgists know this? Was it accident or design? Herbal compounds transformed into powerful medicines or deadly toxins. Simple plants rendered into potent elixirs through processes unrecorded in Vedic texts but preserved in the 9S codices. Diagrams illustrate molecular chains and crystal lattice, not named in any known language. It was to be wielded carefully, if at all. Stories persist of men who tried to replicate the techniques of the fourth book for personal enrichment, only to vanish without a trace. The European alchemists of the Renaissance, such as Paracelsus and Nicolas Flamel, often claimed that their inspirations came from Eastern manuscripts, sometimes through Arab intermediaries. The idea of a philosopher estona, substance capable of perfect transmutation, bears uncanny resemblance to whispers from the fourth book. Not enough to threaten the balance, but sufficient to uplift medicine, agriculture, metallurgy, carefully, selectively. One drop too many, and a cure became a curse. They suggest orchestration. One misused alloy, and bridges collapsed instead of standing eternal. This is not alchemy as medieval Europe knew it, nor even as ancient China pursued it, with its quest for immortality elixirs. Inside were sheets of an unknown metal, etched with geometric patterns. A British officer allegedly sent them to London, but no such artifacts were ever catalogued. They disappeared into the maze of imperial bureaucracy, or perhaps into something more intentional. Is it digitized and stored in a subterranean archive beneath Delhi? Was it smuggled out, divided, translated into cryptic algorithms, and buried in code? Knowledge, once loosed, cannot be called back. And the fourth book was not merely a key, was a lock. Or perhaps, as some believe, its wisdom flows still not through documents, but through teachings passed in silence from one chosen mind to another, cultivating civilization with a subtle hand, encouraging growth without provoking collapse. And the fourth book was a cornerstone of that stewardship. The records were later sealed, and those involved refused to speak. Was this coincidence or a quiet nod to deeper, hidden endeavors? This was industrial alchemy, practical, efficient, dangerous. He was said to carry a metal box, unbreakable, that contained slivers of ancient manuscripts. According to Tamil folktales, he traveled across the sea to Egypt and returned with blueprints for pyramids made not of stone, but of living crystal. Perhaps it was a monument to proof of concept, left not just to withstand time, but to whisper of hidden brilliance, guard against greed. With power comes unraveling. What might such a book contain? To begin with, the purification and reinforcement of materials. One legend suggests that the Nine discovered a method for tempering metals that made them resistant to decay and corrosion, far beyond what the Eros blacksmiths could accomplish. Modern metallurgists have occasionally marveled at the quality of ancient Indian steel, particularly the famed Wootz steel used in Damascus blades. Could such a secret book explain not only the forging of Wootz steel, but the manipulation of alloys and composites that still puzzle us today? Perhaps the text described techniques to produce weapons that were not just stronger, but lighter, designed for both endurance and impact. If the Nine's secrets ever escaped into the hands of warriors, it could have altered the very dynamics of battlefields. Swords that never chipped, armor that flexed like fabric but repelled arrows, tools that remained sharp for decades. And beyond weapons, the fourth book might have delved into the creation of elements, artificially early experiments, if you will, with what we now know as synthetic chemistry. Let us pause here and consider a curious historical anomaly. The Iron Pillar of Delhi, standing over 7 meters tall and weighing more than 6 tons. This column has stood exposed to the harsh elements of the Indian subcontinent for over 1,600 years, yet has not rusted. Some suggest the Iron Pillar is a remnant of the Nine's metallurgical experiments. It may not be conclusive, but the coincidence invites speculation. Moving deeper into the fourth book, we might also find the beginnings of biochemical transmutation, the altering of one substance into another, not for wealth, but for healing or for warfare. This was knowledge intended not to circulate. This brings us to a philosophical undercurrent within the fourth book, a warning written in delicate script between each line of technical marvel. Use only what uplifts. These warnings, part scientific footnote, part moral compass, would served as essential brakes on ambition, and it was said the Nine enforced such limitations fiercely. If we entertain the idea that this knowledge persisted in some form through the centuries, we begin to encounter strange historical echoes. Could these legends have been distorted reflections of an older truth carried westward through centuries of trade and war? It is possible that the Nine did not merely preserve their knowledge in isolation, but used proxy travelers, merchants, emissaries, to seed fragments of it in distant lands. One such emissary may have been a Jain scholar named Ketrapala, known in legends as the man who walked between worlds. Of course, such claims are unverifiable, but the persistence of these legends, their recurrence in cultures far apart in space and time, suggests more than coincidence. The Nine, it seems, were not just protectors, they were gardeners. So what became of this book in the modern era? There are unconfirmed reports, again cloaked in conspiracy, that during the British Raj, a secret excavation in the hills of Orissa uncovered copper cylinders sealed with resin. In the mid-20th century, the Indian government quietly funded a project on ancient metallurgy under the guise of archaeological research. One cannot help but wonder what has become of the fourth book today. In a world now shaped by atomic power, bioengineering, and nanotechnology, the warnings of the Nine feel more prescient than ever. In the next part of our journey, we turn to another of the Nine's forbidden volumes, one said to hold secrets of life itself, biological science, and the manipulation of health and disease. But for now, rest easy, knowing that some doors, thankfully, remain unopened. The fifth book, entrusted to the 9 unknown men, is perhaps the most awe-inspiring and compassionate of all. The book of microbiology and healing. In an age when leeches and charms often stood in place of medicine, this book reportedly contained medical knowledge so advanced that it bordered on the miraculous. The book is said to have explored the invisible world of microbes centuries before Antony van Leeuwenhoek ever peered through his lens, and millennia before Pasteur would speak of germs. Imagine it, in the clean quiet of a secret chamber beneath a Mauryan monastery. A scholar in ochre robes leans over a copper bowl. Within it, herbs steep in steaming water, their oils carefully measured. But this is no ordinary decoction of folk remedies. It covered sanitation, contagion, herbal pharmacology, wound treatment, and even preventive medicine. Were they physicians in disguise, weaving through time like benevolent ghosts? While these lean into fantasy, the consistent theme across centuries is that this book's purpose was healing, preventing the destruction of life, not enabling it. But perhaps progress is not linear. Perhaps knowledge, like fire, can be kindled again and again in different times and places, only to be hidden or lost. Ashoka, in his horror after Kalinga, did not merely want to prevent violence. He wished to alleviate suffering, a vow, written in ink and compassion, that pain need not be eternal. Was this cultural wisdom shaped by secret scientific insight passed down by the fifth book's keepers? And what greater suffering is there than illness that ravages without mercy? He knows the bacterial properties of neem, the antiviral benefits of tulsi, the coagulating power of turmeric. The custodians of this fifth book would have compiled medicinal practices from across the Mauryan Empire, from the Himalayan shamans who used moldy bread to heal wounds, to Ayurvedic practitioners trained in balancing doshas with botanical mixtures. They combined folk knowledge with empirical observation, forming a synthesis that might rival modern holistic medicine. Each decision he makes is guided not by superstition, but by an unseen manuscript, the fifth book. The contents of this volume, as the legend goes, mapped the causes of disease to minuscule organisms invisible to the naked eye. The 9 were not merely scientists, they were healers. One particularly haunting tale from the 12th century refers to a wandering monk in what is now Bengal who cured a village of a wasting sickness with a powder that smelled like ash and salt. The sickness had caused fever, lesions, and coughing of blood symptoms we might today identify as tuberculosis. The monk would not share the origin of his medicine. He left after the village recovered, without accepting coin or praise. Some believe he was one of the 9, or a successor. This raises the question, did the 9 act in secret, not just to guard knowledge, but also to subtly dispense it when the world cried out for help? More radical claims exist, of course. Some say the 5th book contained recipes for immortality, formulas that could regenerate tissue or halt aging. In modern times, the idea of ancient Indians grasping germ theory challenges the linear timeline of scientific progress. Those who believe in the 9.2 India's ancient emphasis on cleanliness, ritual baths, antiseptic herbs, boiling water, fermented foods with probiotic qualities, we may never know. But if such a book did exist, it would be a beacon of hope, a quiet resistance against suffering. As we now drift further into this exploration, the next volume awaits a manuscript cloaked in the mysteries of light and perception. The final volume of the 9, the 6th book, may be the most mystifying and fantastical of all the book of optics and invisibility. What secrets might be hidden within its ancient folios? Light, perception, illusions. Cloaking this book was said to bend the very concept of what is visible to the human eye, and by extension, what is real. From the sacred fires of Vedic rituals to the gleaming mirrors in temple architecture, optics occupied a special place in Indian culture. Under Ashoka's guidance, and later in secret, he turned his study from stone to lenses, experimenting with transparent crystal, polished obsidian, and curved metal surfaces. He studied the way light bent through water bowls, the way shadows danced when firelight was filtered through dyed fabrics. From this devotion was born a new kind of knowledge, the manipulation of sight, but in the realm of optical camouflage. Mirrors angled just right. Robes dyed in patterns that mimicked their surroundings. Consider this, the art of camouflage wasn't formalized in modern military doctrine until the 20th century. The 6th book then becomes more than just a scientific treatise. It becomes a philosophical weapon. If you can control what others see, you can control what they believe. If you can vanish, you can survive. And if you can show them something they cannot understand, you can rule without them knowing it. Texts like the Surya Siddhanta and the Sushruta Samhita already touch upon detailed observations in astronomy and surgery. Is it so improbable that a hidden group like the 9 compiled even deeper, more guarded insights? Yet, forest monks in India painted their skin with ash and ochre to to blend with trees and shadows long before. If the first 6 books built the mind and body, the last 3 may shape the very fabric of civilization itself. And in a world ruled by appearances, that may be the greatest power of all. And yet, each grounded in human need to understand, to protect, to heal, to hide. But the journey is far from over. Is it so impossible that the 9 codified these principles? Smoke, darkness, distraction, and the bending of light, all used in tandem to confuse the eye. The idea of an invisible man wasn't magic. It was the careful orchestration of physics and human psychology. His cloak was stitched with mirrored leaves and threads dipped in lotus resin, making him all but impossible to detect in the palace gardens. Scholars debate the story's authenticity, but some whisper that this man was a direct heir to the 6th book. But what if the 9 pushed beyond cultural understanding into empirical mastery? That the knowledge of optics and invisibility was passed down secretly through artists, architects, and optical inventors in India, eventually influencing figures far beyond its borders. The curious similarities between ancient Indian mirror temples and Renaissance perspective studies have led some to suggest that the knowledge found its way westward, silently guiding global innovations. To the modern ear, it may sound like science fiction. A manuscript from the 3rd century BCE containing detailed knowledge about the properties of light, lenses, reflection, refraction, and possibly even cloaking techniques. That the 6th book provided methods for invisibility. But this tale is older than fiction. It springs from the root of something more elemental, the awe that light inspires, and the control it grants to those who master it. It may have detailed the anatomy of the human eye, mapping the optic nerve, iris, and even outlining how to trick visual perception. It is believed to have included diagrams for primitive lenses, perhaps even functional microscopes or telescope stools, thought to have only appeared in the West over a millennium later. In ancient India, the science of light prakasha was both a spiritual and practical pursuit. Legend holds that the 6th book was entrusted to a master craftsman who had once been a sculptor. The book, it is said, contained treatises on reflection, allowing the user to redirect light with precision. But the most tantalizing claim, not in the Harry Potter sense, with shimmering cloaks and perfect concealment. Could such techniques have been employed in espionage, in warfare, or even in preservation, allowing the 9 to remain hidden across centuries? There is also a curious connection here to Maya, the Hindu philosophical concept of illusion, that reality as perceived by the senses is not the ultimate truth. One obscure manuscript from the 18th century, now housed in a private collection in Rajasthan, describes a royal spy during the Mughal period who could disappear into shadows even under full sun. There's also speculation, mostly among fringe theorists and mystics, that this book never went dark. But in more grounded historical terms, the suggestion that ancient Indian scholars understood reflection, vision, and the psychology of perception well before their European counterparts is not far-fetched. The 6th book, then, may not be about literal invisibility, but about control of light, of narrative, of belief. So far, we have examined 6 of the 9 fabled books, each one brushing against the edge of impossibility in the next section. We'll explore the remaining 3 texts rumored to hold sway over gravity, the human psyche, and the very future of our species. Settle deeper now, and drift onward with us as we turn the invisible page. The Vanishing Scholars of Nalanda. The year is 1193. a chill wind rustles the ancient banyan trees around Nalanda, the greatest university the world has ever known. Here, for centuries, monks, scholars, mathematicians, astronomers, and physicians have studied sacred texts and secret sciences in vast libraries filled with thousands of manuscripts. But this night is unlike any other. The sky is tinged red by flame, and screams echo down the marble halls. They carry no weapons, only satchels bulging with ancient texts. These are not ordinary monks. These are the protectors of secrets, the last defense against total erasure. Some say they were sent by the 9 unknown men. Others claim they were the 9. What happened to them next remains a mystery. Bakhtiar Khilji's army has come, and with it, destruction. Nalanda burns. And yet, amid the smoke and chaos, 9 hooded figures move silently through the shadows. This is where our journey begins. The ashes of Nalanda, a catastrophe of knowledge. Nalanda was more than a university. It was a sanctuary of wisdom, hidden beneath the roots of a hill long considered sacred by local tribes. These vaults contained chambers etched with strange symbols, some similar to Brahmi script, others entirely unfamiliar. With tens of thousands of students and thousands of teachers, it rivaled even the greatest institutions of the West. The British packed them up and sent them to Calcutta for analysis. In them, one officer warns the other, "We've touched something older than empires." The whispers say these vaults belong to the 9. But before any translations could be completed, the documents vanished. No official record of them remains. No museum claims them. Others claim the site was a decoying, elaborate trap for those seeking forbidden knowledge. A few even suggest the disappearance of the scrolls was orchestrated by the 9 themselves, ensuring nothing fell into foreign hands. Texts in every known language filled its massive libraries, from Buddhist sutras to rare treatises on astronomy, alchemy, medicine, and metaphysics. When Khilji's forces destroyed it, they not only burned buildings, but centuries of accumulated knowledge. Reports from the time describe how the fires raged for months. The pages of scrolls and books blackened the skies. But here's the mystery. Not everything was lost. Accounts tell of certain texts and scrolls disappearing just before the attack. Entire volumes believed to be within the 9 books those sacred tomes said to hold. Knowledge too dangerous for mankind vanished from their shelves. They appear in whispers in the oral histories of survivors, in Tibetan scrolls that mention the 9 that did not burn, and in Mongolian tales of fire ghosts who saved the knowledge of the South. If true, this would not be the first time the 9 intervened to preserve wisdom from the flames. Theories swirl around this anomaly. Were these manuscripts spirited away by followers of the 9 unknown? Or had the 9 anticipated this assault long before it occurred? The vanishing scholars of Nalanda are not recorded by name. The enigma of the Sotpura vaults. Fast forward several centuries to British colonial India. In the mid-19th century, British surveyors and archaeologists stumbled upon an underground network of stone vaults in the Satpura range of Madhya Pradesh. Most startling were the rusted lockboxes filled with corroded scrolls and copper plates inscribed with diagrams and formulas. But a handful of letters remain in private archives, letters exchanged between 2 East India Company officers referencing the scrolls. The Satpura vaults became a minor obsession among fringe historians and mystics. Some believe they were a storage site for copies of the 9 books. The disappearance of the Mysore manuscripts by the early 18th century. Southern India was a patchwork of kingdoms caught in the winds of colonial ambition. Amidst this geopolitical turbulence, the kingdom of Mysore emerged as a power of consequence. Led by visionary rulers like Hyder Ali and his son Tipu Sultan. In a quiet back room lined with teakwood shelves and the scent of sandal ink, Tipu's librarians were said to have preserved a collection of manuscripts unlike any other. These weren't merely Persian chronicles or European war manuals. Among them, it is whispered, were palm leaf scrolls wrapped in silk and stored in lacquered caskets, believed to originate from the time of Ashoka. The British catalogued it vaguely as astronomical instruments and native treatises. After this brief mention, the chest and its contents disappeared from the colonial record. Scholars claimed these texts were not meant for rulers, but for sages. In it, Jones expresses frustration that several items taken from Srirangapatna, including devices and scrolls of inexplicable precision and cryptic language, had been misplaced or deliberately obscured in the East India Company's archives in Calcutta. A series of coded letters discovered in a Scottish estate in 1973 made reference to a Shakti code, believed to encrypt directions to hidden manuscripts related to energy manipulation and healing. No definitive evidence has surfaced to confirm the existence of Ashokanera documents in Tipu Sultan's archives. Could Mysore have been one such Volta, southern sanctum, guarded not by secrecy alone, but by fire and rebellion? But the circumstantial clues are tantalizing. Multiple historical references, gaps in archival logs, and artifacts without provenance tucked away in London's basements. In the symbols etched onto temple walls, in oral stories of wandering saints, in the pages of a book mislabeled and forgotten. These documents, allegedly copied by a clerk during the looting of Srirangapatna, have not been authenticated but contain references to magnetic fields, energy resonance, and solar cycles that echo modern scientific concepts. And among them, it is alleged, were volumes penned or copied from the legendary books of the 9 unknown men. Some researchers suggest that certain members of the East India Company, themselves part of esoteric orders, recognized the significance of these manuscripts and removed them not for the crown but for private study. The idea is not far-fetched, considering the Masonic fascination with ancient wisdom, symbols, and hidden sciences. In 1854, a German scientist named Karl Rudbeck claimed to have seen a set of Thrindo Sanskritic lenses during a visit to the British Museum's restricted collection. He wrote in his journal that they displayed refractive properties far superior to any glasswork produced in Europe before the 18th century. He noted they were labeled simply as unclassified Optics India. These men were not just warriors, but reformers, scholars, and collectors of rare knowledge. Could the scrolls from Srirangapatna, smuggled south over centuries to escape political turmoil in the north? The possibility haunts historians to this day. Tipu Sultan, in particular, had an insatiable appetite for technological and philosophical treatises from both the East and the West. It is within this atmosphere of scholarly curiosity and strategic secrecy that we find one of the most compelling yet least discussed mysteries surrounding the 9 unknown, the disappearance of the Mysore manuscripts. The story begins not in a grand palace, but in a modest archive in Srirangapatna, the capital of Tipu Sultan's domain. One such manuscript was said to contain diagrams of astronomical instruments too complex for the period's strange lenses, gyroscopic charts, celestial calculation tables that accounted for precession, eclipses, and planetary retrogrades with unerring accuracy. Another, more cryptic, referenced a circle of sound, a term interpreted by later researchers as a possible reference to sonic weapons or vibrational healing tools. When British forces laid siege to Srirangapatna in 1799, Tipu Sultan was killed and the palace looted. This moment, already soaked in tragedy, was further darkened by what many believe to be a calculated theft of knowledge. The British East India Company, always keen to confiscate anything of strategic or intellectual value, seized the Mysorean archives. Crates of books, scrolls, and mechanical devices were loaded onto ox carts and carried off under armed guard. Among these spoils was a mysterious black-lacquered chest containing what locals believed to be sacred knowledge. The trail picks up decades later in an unlikely place, a letter penned by Sir William Jones, the famous philologist and Orientalist, to a colleague in England. Other references appear sporadically. Could these lenses have originated from the Book of Optics and Invisibility? Adding to the intrigue is the involvement of Freemasons and secret societies during the colonial era. In more recent years, independent scholars and cryptographers have attempted to piece together the lost Mysore documents. Today, the mystery of the Mysore manuscripts remains unresolved. Could it be that the 9 unknown men, aware of rising threats, distributed fragments of their knowledge across the subcontinent? As we drift further into this story, we remember that knowledge, true, dangerous, and transformative, does not always vanish. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, and sometimes it waits for the right moment to return. The ciphered map of Mahabalipuram beneath the whispering winds of the Coromandel coast. Along the edge of the Bay of Bengal lies the ancient coastal town of Mahabalipuram, famous today for its monolithic rock temples and exquisite shore carvings. Mahabalipuram is far more than an architectural marvel. It is a riddle hewn in stone, an echo chamber of secrets long submerged. And within these secrets, many believe, lies one of the few surviving traces of the 9 unknown men, a ciphered map, encoded not in ink or parchment, but in the very geometry of the land. The spatial arrangement of the 5 Rathas, a group of rock-cut temples named after the Pandavas of the Mahabharata, appeared to reflect not just random artistry, but specific constellations. A Lieutenant James Brockwood noted that the structures aligned with Orion's belt and Sirius when observed during the vernal equinox. This discovery, dismissed at the time as coincidence, was later revisited in the 20th century by archaic astronomers who confirmed the celestial alignment with far greater accuracy than ancient tools should have allowed. With this theory in mind, he mapped the positions relative to each other and overlaid them atop the temple ground plan. What emerged shocked even him. A mirrored projection of Mahabalipuram's shoreline over a terrain map extending 30 kilometers inland. A ciphered map, he believed, directing seekers to hidden subterranean chambers or knowledge vaults nestled beneath the Eastern Ghats. Let's begin with what we know. His notebooks were confiscated, and only years later did fragments reappear in university archives in Madras. Mahabalipuram, or Mamalapuram, flourished during the Pallava dynasty around the 7th century CE, well after the reign of Ashoka. The layout of the temples, he argued, amplified certain harmonics at specific tidal cycles. When played on traditional Veena instruments, these harmonics matched ragas used for invoking clarity, healing, and protection. Could the structures themselves have been instrument skis to unlock experiential knowledge? Yet its origin stories stretch far deeper, rooted in legends of lost cities, celestial alignments, and subterranean vaults. They dismiss claims of lost maps and encoded messages as apophenia, the human tendency to see patterns where none exist. But cultures across the world have long encoded spiritual or scientific truths in architecture, be it the pyramids of Egypt, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, or the stone circles of Britain. British officers in the 19th century reported seeing stone spires beneath the waves during low tide, a crystalline device hidden beneath the ocean floor. Or perhaps the map is metaphorically leading not to a location, but to a state of understanding, unlocked only by those willing to see, listen, and think beyond the confines of visible reality, and a repeating cultural memory of something precious buried beneath the waves. And here, in the interlocking symbolism of temples, cave glyphs, and submerged shrines, lies a plausible theory. The nine unknown may have encoded their knowledge across sacred geography. Mahabalipuram, then, would not be a repository but a guide. And then, in 2004, following the catastrophic Indian Ocean tsunami, the sea temporarily retreated and revealed structures off the coast long buried under sand and coral. But inscriptions on its base include cryptic references to Anaya Veda, a term not found in other texts, translated loosely as the unsounded knowledge. Nearby, a hidden chamber uncovered in 1999 revealed stone bowls etched with concentric rings, possibly used in sound experiments or to measure frequencies, consistent with what might be found in the Book of Sound Communication or Vibrational Manipulation. Archaeologists discovered temple foundations, statues, and pillars. Was this confirmation of the ancient legend and the map's authenticity? For centuries, locals whispered of a map hidden within the layout of its stone temples, and reliefs a guide not to treasure. Among its carvings, a blend of mythological scenes and symbolic figures is an anomalous set of glyphs that do not match known Sanskrit, Tamil, or Pallava Grantha scripts. These symbols, resembling a blend of Brahmi and an as yet undeciphered code, are carved with such precision that they seem out of place among otherwise narrative depictions. But to knowledge concealed beneath the earth or the ocean itself. In the early 1800s, when British surveyors mapped the region, a curious pattern emerged. But where does the nine unknown men enter this picture? A weathered stone relief in the Varaha cave temple may hold the answer. In 1923, Indian epigrapher Dr. Ramon Venkatesh postulated that the glyphs were not writing at Albert coordinates. Venkatesh's theory was suppressed, allegedly due to interference from colonial administrators who feared encouraging indigenous mysticism, but the legend lived on. Local fishermen tell of 7 temples swallowed by the sea only, one of which remains visible today. Some researchers suggest the underwater temples, when plotted together with Mahabalipuram's inland architecture, reveal an astronomical calendar or navigational lattice. One temple, the Shore Temple, was long thought to be purely devotional. This brings us to the controversial claim of Dr. Anil Samant, a marine archaeologist who in 2007 proposed that the 9% unknown encoded their teachings within acoustic resonances of Mahabalipuram's architecture. Skeptics, of course, call these theories pseudoscience. In the case of Mahabalipuram, it is the consistency of the clues that keeps curiosity alive. Untranslatable glyphs, precise stellar alignments. If the 9 unknown did indeed use Mahabalipuram as a ciphered map, the question is, what were they pointing to? A chamber containing scrolls. Either way, the whisper of the 9 echoes here, in stone and sea, in glyph and geometry. And the trail now leads westward, toward the desert winds of Rajasthan, where another chapter waits to unfold. The desert vaults of Jaisalmer, beneath the golden dunes of Rajasthan, in the walled city of Jaisalmer, tales drift like sand through the ages. A series of underground chambers has captivated the imaginations of historians and mystics alike. These chambers, sealed behind centuries-old sandstone, were rediscovered in the early 20th century during a renovation ordered by a wealthy merchant's descendant. What they contained, according to archived reports and oral testimonies, might well be one of the most tantalizing pieces of the 9 unknown puzzle, and tourists pass daily over the site of what may have been one of the 9's original knowledge vaults. Access is currently denied by the Archaeological Survey of India, citing historical integrity concerns, but a leaked memo suggested the presence of electromagnetic anomalies, not unlike those found in ancient megalithic sites in Peru and Egypt. The 9, yet in whispers, among the older residents, one hears tales of a guardian monk who comes every 12 years to renew the seal of silence. His face is never remembered, only his robe dyed a strange hue of blue, darker than lapis, lighter than midnight. Rumors swirled that Churchill himself had authorized covert missions to locate and retrieve similar esoteric sciences from colonized regions before the Axis powers could get to them. The British feared that hidden knowledge, especially if it dealt with energy or biological manipulation, might upset the fragile balance of global power. Once powerful Rajput rulers who claimed direct patronage from Ashoka's distant descendants in the northwest. During a storm in 1924, a section of the floor caved in, revealing a steep staircase descending into what appeared to be a forgotten vault. It spoke of a wheel that turns within the mind and a desert flame that burns without fire. Scholars debate its meaning, but some interpret it as a metaphor for non-combustive energy perhaps, even early theories of nuclear fusion. Inside, explorers found bronze urns sealed with wax, scrolls wrapped in silk, and glass vessels filled with strangely viscous liquids that shimmered under lantern light. Most startling of all were the walls, etched from floor to ceiling with patterns resembling circuit diagrams, but done in an ancient motif, halfway between sacred mandalas and modern schematics. No photographs exist from the initial discovery, strange for the time, but reports, published in obscure journals like the Indo-Tibetan Antiquities Register. To this day, the descendants of the Bhatti family refuse to speak about the chamber. In 2019, drone-penetrating radar scans, commissioned by an archaeological, the island of Voices, far to the south, in the Bay of Bengal, lies an island long shrouded in myths and maritime warnings. Narcandom, volcanic and remote, it has rarely been visited, let alone studied in depth. But in 1968, a team of oceanographers on a seismic survey recorded strange audio frequencies emanating from its core tones that repeated in structured intervals, like a forgotten code or song. The sounds followed patterns, sometimes aligning with known Sanskrit meters, sometimes resembling the rhythmic chanting used in tantric rituals, spinning in the cave of the skull, and an alphabet where each letter was a musical tone and a light vibration. Her critics dismissed it as delusion, possibly brought on by volcanic gases. She writes, "It was never meant for the eyes. It sings when the heart forgets itself." Each repository, be it vault, scroll, or sound, may require more than intellect to unlock. It may demand readiness of being. One research team reported equipment interference that scrambled their instruments as soon as they approached the source cave. Her words resonated with ancient Indian yogic concepts: nada, the primordial sound, and bindu, the point of origin. A year later, a linguist named Dr. Meera Badia joined an expedition to the island. What she brought back were hours of tapes now stored in the acoustic archives of the Indian National Sound Repository. If true, it could represent an entirely new medium of knowledge, one that transcends language, script, even sight. Was this the Island Book? One of the 9 repositories, designed not to be read or touched, but heard. More curious than the sounds themselves was Dr. Badia's transformation upon return. She abandoned her academic post, retreated into silence, and wrote a single book titled The Ninth Language, now out of print. In it, she describes a moment on the island when the sound spoke back, not in words, but in layered, meaning impressions, images, sensations. But storms, technical failures, and sudden illnesses have thwarted every attempt. Some believe the island holds an audio archive, what modern science might call a sonic library, a repository of frequencies encoded with meaning, meant to bypass logic and speak directly to the subconscious. One passage in Dr. Badia's book hints at this. Such cryptic fragments point to a possibility both thrilling and humbling, that the 9 understood knowledge not as a static possession, but as a living transmission tailored to time, place, and consciousness. And in this way, secrets are both lost and preserved, not hidden, but waiting, encoded in the very rhythm of the world. The final cipher in the shadowed heart of the forests near Santinakitan, where Tagore once penned poetry to the rustling sal trees. A final thread weaves its way into the tapestry of the 9 unknown men. Here, among ink-stained archives and derelict zamindari estates, scholars speak of a manuscript so strange, so unlike any known Indian script, that it has defied interpretation for over a century. Known only as the Burbhem cipher, this document is believed by some to be the last surviving fragment of the original knowledge corpus entrusted to one of Ashoka's 9. The story begins in 1893, when an antiquarian named Hirilal Mukobadi acquired a bundle of palm leaf manuscripts from a tribal elder near Suri. While most of the texts were folk tales and almanacs, one bundle stood out. Its pages were made not of palm or paper, but of a treated bark, possibly birch or sal, and inscribed with shimmering, oily ink that resisted fading. A team at Jadavpur University scanned the manuscript using multispectral imaging. To their astonishment, the script changed hues under different wavelengths. Some characters only revealed themselves under infrared light. Theories exploded. Was this a rudimentary form of data encryption, or a didactic tool meant to hide knowledge unless the viewer had the right Lighthor mindset? The books weren't just hidden physically, they required inner readiness. Knowledge was power, yes, but it was also a test. The characters resembled no known script, not Brahmi, not Kharosti, not Bengali, not even Tibetan or Pali. Some believe it to be a hoax. Others see it as a linguistic Rosetta Stone. A few, the most hopeful, believe it will speak when the world is ready to hear. He speculated that the script might encode a decision tree designed to teach or test ethical choices in a chaotic world. The implication: the manuscript wasn't just a record, it was an interactive device, a kind of moral simulator cloaked in symbolic language. Not if someone, somewhere, continues to search. Yet rumors persisted. A student of Kiel's, Arundhati Sen, later claimed that the cipher used nested ideograms, symbols within symbols, and was possibly connected to the Book of Language or the Book of Prophecy mentioned in Apocryphal 9, Unknown Lore. Could they have encoded not just facts, but methods of learning tailored to awaken insight rather than just transmit data? Their secrets weren't buried, they were planted like seeds. They grow in silence, in stories, in shadows, in desert vaults and jungle scrolls, in sonic chambers and shifting manuscripts. His version, kept in a monastery near Tolong, told of a man sent by 9 shadows who planted books in 5 lands: forest, mountain, desert, island, and city. Each book could only be read when the mind's mirror was still. Namgyal believed the Burbum script to be the forest book. Sen spent her career in cryptographic linguistics, and in her final lecture before retirement, she cryptically remarked, "The key to unlocking the 9's legacy lies not in the language we speak, but in how we listen." Hiralo, educated in Sanskrit and Persian, was baffled. He stored the pages in a rosewood chest and donated them to a local monastery before his death. There, the cipher might have been forgotten if not for a visiting German linguist, Professor Otto Kiel, in 1912. Kiel had been traveling across Asia to trace the evolution of ancient phonetic scripts. He stumbled upon the Burbum manuscript and was instantly captivated. In his notes, he wrote, "The glyphs are angular yet flowing, geometric yet alive, though designed for both the eye and the ear." He believed it to be a polysemantic code. Each symbol held multiple meanings depending on its placement, stroke, and even pressure. In other words, a living script perhaps meant to be read aloud, not silently. But Kiel's notes, too, vanished. In 1942, during World War II, a bomb raid destroyed much of the records in the Kolkata Institute of Indology, where Kiel's work had been stored. In recent decades, technology brought new eyes to the cipher. A breakthrough came from a young Bengali computer scientist, Soim Ghosh, who noticed parallels between the Burbum glyphs and ancient game theory matrices. Then came the strangest twist. In 2017, a Tibetan scholar named Yesh Namgyal arrived in Bengal, claiming to possess a partial translation of a manuscript that matched the Burbsum cipher. If true, this meant the 9 unknown employed a method of dispersing knowledge, not only geographically, but also cognitively. The echoes of this idea ripple through modern educational theory, esoteric traditions, even neuroscience. Could the 9 have anticipated this? And so we arrive at a haunting possibility. The 9 unknown men weren't hoarders of knowledge, but architects of awakening. Today, the Burbum cipher remains untranslated. It sits in a humidity-controlled vault beneath the Visvabharati library, watched by scholars and monks alike. As the night deepens and monsoon rains drum softly on the Bengal rooftops, one imagines the manuscript breathing, waiting for someone not to read it, but to understand it. This completes Section 3, Secrets Lost, Secrets Preserved, with its final whisper that knowledge may sleep, but it never dies. the Maharajas and the manuscripts, long before the name Ashoka evoked mystery in the modern imagination. It resonated as a symbol of power among India's princely states. The story of the 9 unknown men was not only a tale passed among monks and sages, but also found its way into the gilded halls of the subcontinent's elite. Hidden libraries, cryptic manuscripts, and whispered councils often threaded through the lives of Maharajas, who ruled over their domains with absolute authority and cloaked mystique. The Padmanabhaswamy Temple, with its infamous sealed vaults, is often linked to myths of divine treasures. A now declassified intelligence dossier from 1911 details covert efforts by the British East India Company to acquire certain texts from the Jaipur Royal Library. Certain political families, industrial magnates, and spiritual leaders are whispered to maintain secret affiliations or rituals inspired by the ancient brotherhood. The late Maharani Gayatri Devi of Jaipur, known for her elegance and education, once mentioned in an interview that her grandfather had forbidden anyone from entering a specific room in the city palace. "It is not locked," she said, "but it is sealed by agreement." This mission failed, reportedly due to the intervention of a higher-ranking Brahmin advisor who used coded Sanskrit verses to seal the texts within a ceremonial urn made of copper and quartz. The 9 may no longer roam the earth in physical form, but their intellectual lineage, their gravity persists in circles that operate behind velvet curtains and marble columns. And so the question remains, did Ashoka create a council of hidden sages only to let their work scatter in time? Or did he embed their legacy within the very architecture of India's power structure among the kings, queens, and dynasts who understood that true rule is not enforced by sword or coin, but by the secrets one keeps? These were then buried in an unknown location beneath the city. But less discussed is the role of the Travancore Maharajas as custodians of ancient knowledge. In the mid-1800s, a German scholar named Friedrich Meinhardt visited the court of Swathi Rama Varma, a ruler renowned for his patronage of the arts and sciences. Meinhardt wrote of a hidden room within the palace where the Maharaja kept ancient palm leaf manuscripts, including one that allegedly described a mirror of time that allowed the user to view not just the past, but probable futures. But in thrones, libraries, and sealed rooms where silence is the highest law. Though these claims remain unverified, they fueled decades of speculation among European occult circles. These rulers, many of whom claimed lineage back to Ashoka himself, were not simply political figureheads. They were, in some cases, curators of knowledge lost to history and potentially recipients of fragments from the 9. Among the more compelling records is the case of Maharaja Bhupendra Singh of Patiala, known for his extravagance and global diplomacy during the early 20th century. He was rumored to possess a collection of scrolls bound in dark teak, stored in an underground vault beneath Killa Mubarak. These were no ordinary scrolls. According to accounts from British envoys and a few Indian officials, the writing on these documents resembled no known language and glowed faintly under candlelight. The Maharaja, fiercely protective of his legacy, permitted access only to a select few scholars who were made to swear oaths of silence. Some believe these scrolls were gifted by a wandering ascetic who arrived during a lunar eclipse and left before dawn, never seen again. A similarly intriguing account arises from the kingdom of Travancore in what is today Kerala. The British Raj, often dismissive of local legends, nevertheless kept close tabs on these elite knowledge keepers. Even into the 21st century, the Indian elite have not wholly abandoned their connection to the Nine. These modern echoes hint at an enduring, if intangible, influence. In this golden lattice of palace intrigue and sacred trust, the Nine's influence found fertile ground not in temples alone. Circles within circles, in the corridors of influence that thread from the marble palaces of Indian royalty to the secretive salons of British aristocracy and beyond. The presence of something greater, something quietly shaping history, has been whispered for centuries. The Nine unknown men were not simply hoarders of ancient science. In London, the Theosophical Society, though outwardly a spiritual movement, maintained internal circles groups that explored ancient Eastern knowledge under vows of silence. Annie Besant, one of its leaders, spent years in India and spoke cryptically of hidden masters who influenced humanity through veiled guidance. Her writings contain oblique references to Ashoka and a fraternity of silent watchers. Was rumored to study the Ashokan edicts in Sanskrit and Prakrit. They believed the Nine had counterparts in every age, cloaked behind different titles: Templars, Rosicrucians, or the Rishis of Vedic legend. Claimed to possess a fragment of one of the 9 books translated, he said, for every drawing room discussion about empire and policy, there existed a backroom murmur of things too arcane, too destabilizing, to become common knowledge. The Nine were not worshipped nor exposed. What if the real repositories had become minds, trained and tuned to preserve, protect, and project ideas too powerful for public domain? They were referenced only in metaphor, symbol, and silence, a resonance that would pass between eyes during state dinners, or whispered into the ears of young heirs. From a damaged palm leaf copy found in Pondicherry in 1894, his translation was never published, but private correspondences hint that the book pertained to the sciences of perception and illusion, yet something endured. In think tanks, in closed-door summits, in secluded retreats hosted by tech billionaires and spiritual entrepreneurs alike, the archetype of the 9 lives on, not as fiction, but as a framework. They were believed to be the living expression of an eternal idea. That knowledge, when wielded without wisdom, can fracture worlds. G.D. Birla, a prominent industrialist and confidant of Mahatma Gandhi, was said to have funded expeditions in the 1930s aimed at locating Ashokan vaults in Madhya Pradesh. While these missions are lost to official history, a private letter discovered in 2004 references a chamber beneath a hill shrine in Pachmari, described as containing diagrams of living mechanisms and systems unseen in any modern science. Those close to the seats of power understood this. They investigated anomalous manuscripts, ritual artifacts, and strange geographic sites throughout the subcontinent. One such operation took place in 1886 in the hills of Himachal Pradesh, where a ruined monastery was discovered with murals depicting 9 figures surrounded by circles of flame, stars, and leaves. The symbols closely mirrored descriptions found in Ashokan pillar inscriptions. The site was quietly sealed off, and the murals never made it into official records. And over time, the concept of the 9 was mirrored in more secular forms: private councils, elite lodges, and invitation-only clubs whose members claimed more than wealth. They claimed guardianship across the British Empire, particularly during the Victorian and Edwardian periods. various secret societies emerged with remarkable similarities to the rumored structure of the Nine. Was this literary flourish, or had Besant encountered something or someone during her stays in Benares and Madras? More tangibly, the British Crown maintained a body known as the Oriental Research Committee, supposedly for colonial administration, but their classified files tell a different story. Meanwhile, in Paris, a group known as La du Savoir Silencio, back in India, some contemporary figures took the legend literally. If such knowledge was discovered, it was quickly reburied. The circles of power have always had an outer face and an inner sanctum. As history moved into the 20th century, the old palaces and colonial clubs began to fade. What if the world's elite no longer needed scrolls to carry ancient secrets? Silicon sages and the digital Dharma chakra. In today's gilded era of digital monarchs and corporate dynasties, the echoes of the Nine Unknown have not gone silent. Rather, they have evolved, slipping seamlessly into the circuits of modern power. In hushed conversations at exclusive think tanks and quiet corridors of global forums, the possibility of a hidden intelligent, protective, precise remains a topic of fascination. The idea is rarely discussed openly, but in private salons from Palo Alto to Zurich, the archetype of the Nine is reappearing in unexpected ways. No longer hidden in mountain caves or temple vaults, the resonance of their teachings, if they persist, may now hum through fiber optic cables and quantum processors. Finch, whose ancestry traces back to Anglo-Indian roots, was known among colleagues for her odd collection of Sanskrit manuscripts and her insistence that certain brainwave patterns could be tuned like a raga. During a closed symposium in Sweden, they were transcribers of the living code stewards of humanity's deeper architecture. A growing number of tech entrepreneurs, particularly in India and Southeast Asia, have begun to incorporate Vedic metaphysics into algorithmic design. These initiatives aim to recover lost ways of knowing synesthetic cognition, nonlinear logic, bioresonance, and sound-based storage. While this sounds like fringe science, many of these experiments are cloaked beneath the aegis of neuroscience, linguistics, or advanced computing. Companies working on consciousness mapping, nootropics, and reality modeling sometimes cite obscure ancient sources, many of which have no direct lineage except whispers from yogic or tantric traditions. A few of these startups even use the symbol of 9 interlocking circles or triangles as their logos, an uncanny parallel to the 9 unknown supposed insignia. From robed sages to academic advisors, from scroll keepers to data engineers, from ancient manuscripts to private cloud vaults, she allegedly demonstrated a prototype that induced lucid dream states in test subjects, enabling them to access what she called inherited archetypal memory. According to leaks, Finch believed that ancient knowledge was not just textual, but bioencoded, that humanity itself was the library waiting to be accessed through the right key. For those who seek patterns in history, the trajectory is uncanny. From Ashokan scroll to silicon chip, the custodians of great knowledge have always known that power lies not merely in invention, but in how knowledge is stored, shared, and shielded. The speaker, an unnamed South Indian monk in civilian attire, presented a startling proposition that humanity was repeating the curve of Ashoka's time, that we had rediscovered weapons of immense power before wisdom had caught up. He argued that the role of the Nine had always been to govern the pace of knowledge, released to ensure that truth emerged in harmony with readiness. Among the world's modern elites, particularly in the overlapping spheres of technology, futurism, and metaphysical exploration, the Nine are not so much a legend as a template. Take, for instance, the case of Dev Rajan, an elusive Indian-born technologist who disappeared from the public eye after selling his augmented cognition startup to a major American defense contractor. Rajan had publicly spoken about the ancient Indian systems of memory, logic, and pattern recognition as models for artificial intelligence. But to those within these circles, the Nine are less a historical curiosity and more a pattern cipher to interpret the changing seasons of human evolution. Whether they ever existed as individuals or not, their concept lives in the minds of those who understand that not all progress is benign, and not all knowledge belongs in the daylight. In a rare interview given in 2012, he referenced the Navaratnanaine jewels, or advisors of Emperor Vikramaditya, suggesting that true innovation must be shepherded, not scaled. A former colleague later claimed that Rajan was obsessed with Ashoka and had once brought to a board meeting a hand-drawn diagram of 9 interlocking wheels, each marked with a Sanskrit syllable and a data parameter. His final known project was codenamed Dharmacharya. Another figure of interest is Dr. Olivia Finch, a neuroscientist who helped pioneer transcranial learning interfaces. In a footnote from one of her unpublished papers, she writes, "The Nine were not protectors of knowledge. The convergence of ancient wisdom and emergent technologies doesn't end there." More provocatively, several international venture capital firms have begun investing in research into esoteric epistemologies. At the 2019 World Summit on Human Potential, held privately in Bhutan, a panel discussion titled "Custodianship in the Age of Infinite Knowledge" explored the ethical implications of accelerated learning. He left the stage without taking questions. To skeptics, all of this is coincidence. Modern fascination with ancient mystery is nothing new. What if, as some believe, the Nine have never ceased operating, but have simply changed form? And in this transition, one thing remains unchanged: their mission to protect humanity, not from ignorance, but from the untempered blaze of its own brilliance. The spiritual aristocracy, even as temples stood tall and technology surged forward, there remained a quieter, more enduring pillar in the tapestry of power: the spiritual aristocracy. These were not kings with armies or tycoons with ledgers, said to appear across centuries, unaged and unchanging. Babaji is rumored by some to be either a direct emissary of the Nine or a member himself. His cryptic teachings and rare sightings form a tapestry of clues pointing toward a living bridge between the modern world and Ashoka's ancient design. It said that Indira Gandhi herself consulted with spiritual advisors who claimed descent from these ancient lines. These were the mystics, the lineage holders of esoteric knowledge, the gurus with silent followings, and the monks who whispered to monarchs while couched in religious language. Some believe this was a veiled nod to the Ashokan Brotherhood, interpreted through Tibetan Buddhist cosmology. Satellite imagery has revealed structures perched in locations previously thought uninhabited. Their manuscripts, passed from guru to disciple, contain techniques for extending life, manipulating matter, and even influencing thought. The connection. One of the Siddhar scrolls mentions a king who appointed 9 guardians of the fire, a phrase that scholars interpret as a metaphor for protectors of sacred knowledge. Some Tibetan accounts speak of a group known only as the Watchers in Stone. believed to be monks who receive visions, the art of living foundation, the Isha foundation, and even esoteric Christian monasteries in Greece and Armenia report visions, synchronicities, and rediscoveries of texts that mirror themes found in legends of the Nine. They advise CEOs, they inspire policy, they help frame global narratives about humanity's future, and more, a continuation, an unbroken whisper passed through breath and mantra, dream and devotion, from the caves of Himalaya to the corridors of Davos. And whether knowingly or not, they often repeat the patterns established millennia ago when Ashoka's Nine first took their silent oaths, and guidance from unseen masters hidden in realms of thought rather than geography. Sri Aurobindo, a revolutionary turned mystic, penned deeply layered treatises on evolution, consciousness, and human destiny. His ashram in Pondicherry became a haven for intellectuals and diplomats. Some of his disciples claimed that his visions came not only from meditation, but from direct communion with the keepers of hidden wisdom, and by many as the Nine. The spiritual elite were often the mediators between the Nine and the outside world, or so some believe. One of the more enigmatic figures in this realm was Mahavatar Babaji, a deathless yogi referenced by Paramahansa Yogananda in his autobiography of a yogi in the 20th century. As India awoke from colonial sleep, spiritual figures gained unprecedented influence, not just among seekers, but among politicians, scientists, and even militaries. There were whispers that the Nine employed such avatars as antennas, receiving and transmitting insights that subtly shifted political tides and scientific advancement. In the Himalayan regions, particularly near Mount Kailash and along the ridges of Ladakh, there are cloisters that refuse modern contact. The Dalai Lama, in a now obscure 1962 interview with a Japanese Buddhist magazine, made a cryptic reference to 9 forms of bodhisattva power that preserve knowledge across time. Meanwhile, in South India, the lineage of Siddhar's mystic saints who practiced advanced forms of alchemy, medicine, and meditation are often linked to the Nine. In a modern echo of this spiritual aristocracy, ashrams and spiritual centers around the world have become New Age embassies of old wisdom. But these spiritual institutions are not passive repositories. They are active participants in the global ecosystem of power. In this light, the spiritual aristocracy is less a deviation from the 9's original mission. Thrones and threads, dynasties of the doctrine. If the Nine's legacy was carried by kings and mystics, then it also flowed through the bloodlines of families who governed not just countries, but ideas. Dynasties have long been more than hereditary rulers. They've been stewards of continuity, bridging past and future with inherited philosophies and unspoken knowledge. But what if there were deeper dimensions? The House of Windsor, for example, maintained a cabinet of Oriental curiosities, and King George V reportedly received translations of Upanishads annotated by Indian mystics. Some believe these annotations hinted at 9 doctrines, subtle cues embedded in metaphors. Letters between Jawaharlal Nehru and scholars of ancient Indian texts suggest a curiosity that went beyond history into the domain of metaphysics and moral responsibility. King Abdullah's grandfather was known to meet with Eastern scholars privately, exploring commonalities between the Quranic metaphors of hidden knowledge and the Buddhist esoterica passed through the 9, sometimes diluted, sometimes defied, but always present. One unpublished letter references a visit to a Himalayan temple, where he was shown texts not meant for the eyes of politicians, but for their spirits. India's Nehru-Gandhi dynasty, for instance, is often examined through political lenses. John F. Kennedy was fascinated by Eastern philosophy, and his wife Jacqueline invited Indian philosophers to the White House. Some declassified reports even mention a dinner where the concept of the Nine was alluded to, in a discussion about nuclear ethics. Similarly, in the royal houses of Europe, there exist collections of Vedic texts, many acquired during colonial expansions, not simply as artifacts, but studied and discussed. In the Middle East, the Hashemite dynasty of Jordan has preserved ancient manuscripts detailing the philosophical bridges between Sufism and Indic mysticism. They weave their legacy not only through marriage and law, but through whispered doctrines, cloaked texts, and careful selection of advisors. These examples point to an intriguing pattern. Dynasties that endure often have one hand in politics, one hand in commerce, and one foot in the quiet river of sacred knowledge. Even modern democratic families, like the Kennedys or the Rockefellers, have been surrounded by thinkers, scientists, and mystics. From Mughal emperors to Silicon Valley heirs, the pattern holds. The Nine's ethos flows through dynastic veins. The hidden ninth, final echoes among the elite, amid the opulence of ruling classes and the whispering halls of spiritual sanctums. The most elusive question remains: who is the ninth? Legends often speak of the Nine in a collective sense, but among some circles, there exists the notion that one among them was always hidden even from the others. This hidden ninth is said to act as a failsafe, a singular entity empowered to dismantle the entire network if corrupted. Nikola Tesla, with his unearthly insights. Ada Lovelace, who foresaw computing a century early. Srinivasa Ramanujan, who claimed divine inspiration for his impossible mathematics. Sometimes for tradition, sometimes for someone who might arrive. In a Davos side meeting in 2018, a tech magnate reportedly remarked, "We keep the ninth seat for the one who knows when we've gone too far." Because the architecture of global power, its rotating chairs and ancient symbols, reflects a template set down thousands of years ago by a Mauryan emperor who saw too clearly what knowledge could do. The others laughed, but no one sat in it. Were they touched by the hidden ninth, or brief vessels? Unlike the others, he or she had no domain but silence and observation. Throughout history, anomalies arise. Individuals who seem to appear out of nowhere, disrupt narratives, and then vanish. It may be a principle encoded in certain bloodlines, an instinct in spiritual lineages, or a self-aware intelligence nudging history. But those who wield power often behave as if this presence exists. They pause before certain decisions. They avoid certain topics in public. They show reverence, not for gods, but for quiet constraints. In elite circles, particularly among secretive think tanks and transnational councils, there is a recurrent motif, an unknown chair, always left empty. The hidden ninth may not be a person at all. And so, in boardrooms and bunkers, in monasteries and memory palaces, the legend lives on. Not because of belief, but because of pattern. He chose 9, but he left one hidden, and somewhere in the encrypted folds of our civilization, that ninth still listens. Of elephants and empires, the animal allies of Ashoka. Long before the stethoscope met the tiger's pulse, or the microscope traced the honeybee's dance, The ancients of India gazed upon the animal world, not with scientific detachment, but with reverence, curiosity, and a whisper of fear. From the frosted peaks of Kashmir to the tropical coasts of Tamilakam, it embraced nearly every biome of the subcontinent. Ashoka, with his insatiable thirst for knowledge after the Kalinga War, saw animals not merely as subjects of dominion, but as teachers, living expressions of Dharma and Lapi, potentially keys to deeper mysteries. Scribes recorded their sleep cycles, vocalizations, mating patterns, and dietary preferences. The 9 unknown men, once formed, are believed to have dedicated one of their books to zoological science, not in the sense of cataloging species, but in exploring the interfaces between human and animal minds. Their sensitivity to tremors and magnetic shifts led to theories of them being natural seismic detectors. Owls were trained not only for hunting rodents, but for nocturnal reconnaissance. Their ability to glide silently in the dark was studied and mimicked by Ashoka's engineers in designing covert footwear for spies. If this book still exists, it may contain not only methods for understanding animal behavior, but theories on empathy as a neurological bridge, a way of sensing consciousness across species lines. But beyond this scientific curiosity, there are stranger account scrolls unearthed from Nalanda that speak of attempts to communicate through dreams. Monks believed that the vibration of bees, collectively buzzing in sacred ratios, could influence mental states. The 9 were not just studying animal physiology, they were studying resonance, feedback, entrainment, the capacity of living things to attune to one another beyond sight and sound. His vision of Dharma was not anthropocentric, it was ecological, symphonic. Visitors were instructed to meditate within these sonic fields. Some described euphoric clarity, others nausea. A few wept uncontrollably. But as a declaration of kinship, all beings seek happiness. Let none cause terror to another. It is a simple sentence, repeated on pillars across India. But to those who lived under his reign, and perhaps to those initiated into the secrets of the 9, it meant something far more radical. Ashoka himself, it is written, would sleep beside the elder bulls during monsoon rains, emerging with symbols etched in ink upon his arms. Horses, bulls, camels, and elephants were kept in concentric rings, each ring corresponding to a different domain of natural knowledge. The tiger was blind in one eye and missing a leg. Instead of being euthanized, it was kept in a special enclosure. Visitors claimed to experience visions while in its presence, flashes of unknown languages, sudden dizziness, or extreme tranquility. A visiting Greek ambassador described the tiger as a creature who speaks not by voice, but by silence. Trainers, often recruited from rural mystic sects, were instructed to observe not just behavior, but synchronicities, unusual correlations between animal actions and distant events. Some were convinced the animals could predict political uprisings, droughts, or births of spiritually significant children. These were not dreams, he claimed, but transmissions. It is said that after the war, his heart broke not only for the human dead, but also for the beasts who perished senselessly. Drums and flutes, played in certain rhythms, could call the birds back from staggering distances. The 9 may have developed these techniques not only to enhance communication, but to map the sensory fields of various animals, to understand the world as they perceive it. From this pain, a new obsession emerged, to understand the language of the creatures who shared his world. Among them stood Emperor Ashoka, king, reformer, and perhaps most intriguingly, keeper of strange knowledge. While his edicts sing of peace and dharma, there is another layer whispered in monastic halls and tribal legends, that Ashoka's understanding of animals went far beyond compassion, that under his rule, animals were not only protected but studied, decoded, and, in some unsettling cases, made instruments of power. The Mauryan Empire, at its peak, was a mosaic of climates and creatures. He began with elephants. The elephant was a symbol of royalty, of course, but it was also a mirror. Elephants displayed memory, empathy, grief. Ashoka's first recorded decree banning animal slaughter followed a long retreat during which he reportedly observed a matriarch mourning her calf. Monks claim that from this moment, the emperor ordered not just a cessation of elephant hunts, but the beginning of their study. A great sanctuary was built outside Pataliputra, where elephants roamed freely but were closely monitored. Whether metaphor or fact, these stories set the tone for what followed. Peacocks, known for their dazzling plumage and shrill cries, were raised in specific temple courtyards, not merely for beauty, but as early warning systems. The emperor's own royal stables were arranged not by hierarchy of utility, but by conceptual kinship. One compelling story tells of a wounded tiger brought to Ashoka's sanctuary by forest monks. Other records refer to the training of falcons to deliver coded messages, their paths dictated not by geography, but by harmonic cues. And then there were the bees. Ashoka's gardens were dotted with elaborate hives not randomly placed, but built into geometrical arrangements aligned with the stars. These experiences were not dismissed. They were documented, catalogued, and in some cases, replicated with sound instruments. To Ashoka, animals were not lesser beings. They were allies, messengers, guardians of truths, too primal for human language. In this light, his post-war edicts read not merely as moral reforms, that the wall between man and animal was not fixed, that language could evolve, that the beasts had something to teach us. The 10th book, Zoological Alchemy, in the speculative shadows of the 9 unknown. There are persistent rumors of a 10th book. This apocryphal volume, absent from the canonical list of the 9 fields of secret knowledge, is whispered to contain secrets so potent, so incomprehensible, that its existence is denied even among those who believe in the 9. But within these grand displays lay coded messages many scholars believe. The emperor did not just collect exotic animals, he placed them strategically in key cities, temples, and observatories. In Uzujane, a city once known for its advanced astronomical center, a particular species of owl silent, nearly invisible in the Dewas, kept in enclosed aviaries. If a man could influence a dog's emotions with a gesture, what could be achieved through hormonal modulation, auditory stimuli, or scent-based programming? The 10th book, according to one 15th century Tibetan manuscript, was rumored to contain formulas of communion, instructions for cross-species communication, not through language, but through intent, resonance, and perception. Priests who maintained these creatures claimed they were listeners of time, tuned not to stars, but to human thought. Jain monks claimed these animals were visions seen during deep meditation. But later discoveries of murals in the same monastery murals showing these creatures interacting with sages have led some to believe they were actual creatures, altered or summoned by practitioners of the forbidden science. Dogs trained to detect not just explosives but emotional instability. Pigeons used in cryptography. dolphins trained to deliver payloads. These programs didn't arise in a vacuum. Some intelligence documents reference a joint Soviet-Indian project titled Agnivudra, allegedly based on recovered scrolls from Nalanda before its destruction. Those scrolls, according to one anonymous source, described thought resonance between man and beast. These texts implied genetic manipulation or spiritual transference. And while it may sound fanciful, the 9 were said to possess knowledge of biochemistry, hidden in the genes of engineered animals, encoded in the behavior of migratory patterns, cloaked in rituals passed down by forest-dwelling monks. The possibility isn't just fantastically, is deeply unsettling, because it suggests that the animals around us may not be witnesses to history, but participants. These weren't simple Mahout techniques. They were described as rituals involving breath control and synchronized movement. One such tribe in present-day Jharkhand believed elephants could enter dreams, relay warnings, and even heal internal wounds with touch. Was this animism more an echo of the 10th book? It's plausible that certain species were selectively bred or enhanced, not just for labor, but for surveillance and influence. If the 9th dealt with sociology, the 10th, it is said, dealt with zoological alchemy, the bridge between animals and altered reality. The fish were not eaten, nor were they ornamental. They were studied. Ashokan scrolls, reportedly found in this region, described the response of fish schools to lunar phases and magnetic shifts. Shamans claim to receive messages from these birds, not tweets, but lucid dreams and visions. Some interpret these accounts as allegorical, but others believe the birds are genetically unique carriers of bioelectric energy, naturally occurring in rare Himalayan breeds. The 9, with their deep interest in neurological science, may have used such animals to test memory transference, learning by osmosis, or even remote influence. Could these have been primitive sensors? Were they subjects or agents of something more profound? A code that shaped not only the behavior of beasts, but the mind of man in relation to them. One such document describes a ritual involving the blue peacock, India's national bird, whose calls would be used to encode warnings across long distances. The peacocks were trained to mimic a tonal language known only to certain forest monks. This isn't simply symbolic poetry, it's an encryption technique. Stories of Ashoka's vast menageries often paint them as symbolic of imperial wealth and wisdom. Further south, in the coastal province of Kanchipuram, sacred tanks were maintained not for worship, but for the habitation of specific fish. Ancient texts, mostly dismissed as metaphorical or mythological, speak of beings known as vriksha jivas, tree spirits, who could bond with birds and beasts to transfer information. The 9 may have viewed animals not only as symbols or research subjects, but as conduits. There's more. The Tamil Siddhar texts, some of which are written in undeciphered forms of Tamil Brahmi, reference Ingiye Rakshaka, serpent guardians, that were neither fully snake nor human. Colonial-era accounts by British officers stationed in North India describe tribes that spoke to their elephants as equals, commanding them without vocal cues. In Rajasthan, a now-destroyed Jain monastery once housed carvings that depicted winged lions, three-eyed jackals, and horses with symbols etched into their skin, not brands, but geometric codes. And then there are the birds of Shambhala. Tibetan legend holds that these birds are capable of flying between worlds, navigating through realms of thought and ether rather than mere sky. In the 20th century, Russian and Indian scientists both explored animal cognition and its military applications. Could it be that the 10th book was never lost but dispersed? And if that's true, what have they seen that we have not? What have they remembered that we have forgotten? The sacred herds, guardians of forgotten scripts. It is easy to forget that animals were once the bearers of text. In the pre-paper world, parchment and vellum were made from the skins of calves, lambs, and goats. Knowledge was literally inscribed on flesh, but the story does not end at passive utility. These elephants, some believed to be descendants of Ashokan herds, are thought to retain behavioral patterns linked to specific rituals and locations. Priests speak of elephants that weep at ruined shrines or grow agitated near former battlegrounds. Some monasteries train young monks to respond to these bleats with mantras, believing the soundscape aligns their breathing to forgotten rhythms. Is this pastoral poetry, or a technique meant to stimulate cognition, memory, or even a state of altered consciousness? They are treated not as beasts, but as reincarnated historians. What if these discoveries are merely rediscoveries? What if the 9 were not preserving zoological curiosities, but entire libraries encoded in fur, feather, and scale? In parts of India, certain herds were believed to be protectors of sacred memory. Farmers claim that these symbols are not decoration but activators, that they calm storms, avert plagues, or call rain. This might be dismissed as superstition, were it not for the symbol's uncanny resemblance to glyphs found in Mohenjo-Daro and Harappan seals. Could the 9 have known how to embed emotional responses into livestock? Could their leather have been used to pass code, not only in ink, but in resonance? The Marwari horses of Rajasthan, for example, were not just war mounts. Legends tell of particular steeds that only responded to Sanskrit commands sung at a specific pitch. These horses were considered divine by Rajput rulers, not only for their bravery, but their supposed ability to remember battlefield formations, recognize enemy emblems, and predict changes in weather. Ancestral songs tell of a black stallion named Rakshaka, who is said to have saved a fort by guiding its queen through a sandstorm, navigating entirely by instinct, and some say encoded training passed through generations of stable masters initiated into the 9's zoological doctrines. In Kerala, a community of temple elephants is tended not only for rituals, but for what priests claim is genetic memory. Water buffaloes in Nagaland are adorned with symbols drawn from ancient scripts scholars haven't deciphered. Shepherds in the Himalayas tell of goats that sing, not literal songs, but patterned bleats that follow tonal scales. In modern animal studies, we now acknowledge mirror self-recognition in elephants, cognitive maps in birds, and language-like structures in whale song. To the 9, animals were not inferior. They were allies, mediums, and sometimes repositories, living scrolls who carried the weight of forgotten wisdom. And as climate change, extinction, and genetic modification accelerate, one wonders, are we erasing these living texts forever, or merely prompting them to reveal themselves again in our hour of need? Whisperers of the wind, birds, flight, and the transmission of secrets in the shaded groves of the Mauryan Empire. Under the rustle of tamarind trees and the cry of koel birds, an entire language once fluttered on feathered wings. If the beasts of the land represented strength, stability, and earthly power to Emperor Ashoka and his secret 9, but the 9 unknown, it is whispered, saw such practices as base beginnings of something far greater. For them, birds were more than couriers. They were receivers of subtle cues, carriers of coded thoughts. Some ancient texts hint at pigeons, trained to respond not only to geographical directions, but to emotional fields. These birds were released into contested territories or among foreign courts. If caught, they appeared decorative. But under the right light, the inscriptions could be read a form of avian steganography. The nine believed these routes aligned with ley lines' natural energy corridors across the subcontinent. Swifts would vanish in Bihar and reappear weeks later near the Indus, their feathers tinged with dust not found in any Mauryan region. Their flight, it was proposed, was not aimless migration, but a tracking of magnetic or spiritual fields. Some monks recorded dreams wherein the swifts whispered names, numbers, even dates, events that later unfolded as truth. Some believe this practice inspired later Mughal traditions of using animals as canvases for cryptic tattoos and dye-based espionage. But to Ashoka's circle, this was the intersection of biology and the unseen world. Birds were fed according to planetary positions. Their cries, recorded at dawn and dusk, were analyzed by sound scholars, some of whom reportedly went deaf from prolonged exposure to high-frequency songs used during lunar eclipses. One scroll, said to have survived in fragments at the Library of Taxila, speaks of the dove that weeps at a death not yet known. Whether metaphor or mystery, the nine were convinced that certain birds were capable of prescient behavior. Then the birds of the sky represented something far more elusive: speed, freedom, and, perhaps most importantly, the transference of knowledge across distances without detection. But to observe, to circle, to vanish, and return with inexplicable precision, especially birds. The presence of the bird was said to modulate the trance, lengthen it, or alter its visions. The wings of hawks were mapped like sonic devices, with notations on feather vibration, wing angle, and sound wave generation, that in the shimmer of a feather and the arc of a wing, the secrets of earth and, maybe even time, could be read by those who chose to look skyward. Parrot tongues were described as mirrors of mimicry, biological devices capable of near-human reproduction of speech. But the nine did not stop at mimicry. They asked, what does the bird understand when it mimics? In one famous record, the seer Arvindesa claimed to have seen the collapse of future kings and the rise of stone cities in the sky while cradling a dying parrot. The bird expired at the exact moment he finished speaking. Its body was mummified and later encased in gold leaf. In some cases, the birds were released with no destination given. Their path was guided by sound frequencies played from flutes or brass bowls, tuned to specific harmonic ratios. Each tone, according to these accounts, contained a direction, a mood, or even an instruction. This part of the mysterious book of animals has been speculated by fringe historians to deal almost entirely with avian biology, behavior, and what might be termed as psychic aviculture. The training of birds, not just in flight, but in information, transmission, and interception. The use of pigeons as messengers is well documented across civilizations. Falcons were particularly prized. Ashoka had entire aviaries devoted to the training of these raptors, not simply to hunt. But more intriguing still were the birds that were never meant to return. Legends tell of sky scribes, rare minnows, and hill partridges whose feathers were painted with thin, shimmering lines of script. And then there were the swifts. These birds, nimble, tireless, nearly always in flight, were observed to follow migratory routes that puzzled even the emperor's most learned astronomers. To modern ears, it sounds like the fevered blend of shamanism and pseudoscience. The aviaries of Patalipatra were arranged in concentric spirals. Within each spiral lived species aligned with the four cardinal directions and their corresponding elements: air, fire, water, and earth. Why such intensity? Because the 9 believed birds not only responded to the world, they shaped it. In rare cases, these birds were allowed to perch on the arms of seers during ritual trances. 2. The 9 animals weren't just studied, they were seen as amplifiers, receivers, and sometimes initiators of psychic resonance. This part of the book reportedly included diagrams that merged bird anatomy with schematic representations of wind, breath, and mantras. If even 10% of these legends hold truth, the 9 unknown may have achieved the early beginnings of animal-assisted communication, long before the first formal studies of ethology. And as always, such knowledge was never purely passive. In the final verses of The Whispers of Flight, a poem is attributed to one of the 9. Where feathers gather in spiral flight, secrets rise from silent night. Not all who speak do understand, but all who fly may map the land. This, perhaps, was the central thesis of this section, that knowledge is not bound by tongue or tool. The silent menagerie, underground vaults, and genetic guardians. Not all of Ashoka's animal allies walked in daylight. Not all roamed wild forests or sat in temple courtyards beneath the watchful eyes of monks. Some were kept in silence, hidden from the public, stored not in stables or aviaries, inscribed with warnings in Prakrit and Brahmi. Enter not, for here sleep the guardians of the code. What lay behind the stone door remains disputed. Some say it led nowhere. Others claim it was sealed again by monks who sensed that what stirred within had not forgotten how to awaken, but also said to have penned treatises on animal behavior. Ashoka commissioned deep vaults carved into mountainsides and cavernous complexes beneath key cities. These were not zoos or prisons, they were living libraries. But in sanctuaries beneath the earth, places whispered about in the dead of night and known only to a handful of initiates. These places were known as the silent menageries. Rumors of these subterranean vaults first emerged in the early 20th century, when explorers stumbled upon a sealed corridor beneath the ruins of Nalanda. This included not only rare species like the white tiger, the blue peacock, or the hornless rhinoceros of the Northeast. One recurring tale describes a serpent with scales that shimmered in patterns not seen in natural light, patterns that only revealed themselves during certain lunar alignments. Their daily tasks included singing precise tonal melodies designed to calm or stimulate the creatures. Though dismissed as legend, recent acoustic studies of Indian cattle behavior suggest that certain frequencies do induce deep relaxation or even altered responsiveness. The 9 might have uncovered or even designed these responses intentionally. These chants, passed down orally and never written, were a form of vibrational programming. Some claim the animals could remember tones across generations. It was about encoding memory. The 9 supposedly kept such a serpent within a chamber lined with silver mirrors and sandstone slabs, each carved with Sanskrit mantras. Stories abound of jackals with near-human understanding, of goats with metallic-colored eyes that responded to Sanskrit commands. of a lioness that refused meat and meditated for hours under a Bodhi tree, that patterns of behavior, memory, and even spiritual awareness could be passed through DNA, not just physically, but vibrationally. For them, the study of life was not about dissection, it was about resonance, harmony, and alignment with natural laws that modernity has barely glimpsed. A peacock that had once danced to thunder might pass down its sensitivity to storms for 20 generations. Creatures were not lab rats, they were collaborators, sacred, sometimes feared. Each vault was said to have 3 keys, one physical, one tonal, and one karmic. That is, even if someone found the vault and possessed the right pitch to open its door, they would not be permitted entry if their intention was not pure. That they sleep in suspended states, awaiting a world that remembers how to speak the language of harmony. The vault itself would deny them. Some described an overwhelming dizziness or blindness when approaching the entrance uninvited. A raven trained to mimic Vedic hymns might one day teach them to a child yet unborn. But also unusual hybrids, such as horses with unusually high intelligence, or snakes said to display collaborative behavior in rituals. But the legend of the silent menageries predates this finding by millennia. They were, perhaps, the result of generations of selective breeding guided by principles we have only now begun to rediscover in molecular biology. According to a now-lost manuscript attributed to the sage Vatsyana Best, known for his Kama Sutra, it is here that the 9 unknown men are believed to have conducted their most controversial work, experimentation not just on understanding animals, but preserving them and enhancing them. Modern science would call it pre-genetic engineering. That he was guided to a temple below the earth, where carved stone perches bore the outline of long-vanished birds. In niches carved into the walls, animal bones had been carefully placed not in piles, but in precise geometrical patterns. He wrote of a presence, almost mechanical, humming in the chamber. He was told it was the breath of the earth, kept alive by the memory of those who once flew above it. One of the 9, scholars believe, was assigned the responsibility of preserving the genetic lineages of sacred and unique creatures. These creatures were not always natural, but it did not end there. Several traditions, especially among Himalayan shamans and Tamil alchemists, speak of creatures that were guardians of vibration. Animals whose very cells had been attuned to frequencies thought to open portals of insight or healing. In these chambers, records suggest animal caretakers were not merely biologists, they were spiritual stewards. In South India, a curious oral tradition tells of the 3-eyed bull, an enormous white beast said to have roamed near Kanchipuram and respond only to flute music played in an unknown scale. Preserving such animals was not just about biology. The 9 believed, it is said, that evolution was not linear but spiral. Hence, the vaults, not cages, but archives. In a chamber beneath what is now Bihar, a missionary named Father Marquesi claimed in his journals, more controversially, scattered accounts exist of hybrid creatures, chimeras. Perhaps that may have existed in these secret programs. While these tales drift into the realm of myth, the 9 were not bound by modern distinctions between science and magic. The silent menageries, then, may have been the world's first living laboratories, places where ethics, spirituality, and biology met. Access to these places was tightly controlled. There are whispers that the vaults still exist, that in caves beneath forgotten stupas, or buried under the shifting sands of Rajasthan, or hidden within the unexcavated hills of Orissa. Creatures still live, direct descendants of the original guardians. The real question is not whether such menageries existed. The question is whether we are still capable of hearing the call. Can we, drowned in the noise of the modern world, still sense the hum of the earth beneath our feet? And if we find the vaults, what would we do? Would we learn? Or would we, as we so often have, try to control? The silent menagerie stands not only as a mystery of the past, but as a mirror of the future. For, in how we treat the other living beings of this world, we reveal who we truly are. And the nine knew in that revelation lies either redemption or ruin. The final animal message in the final chapters of Ashoka's life, long after the conquest of Kalinga, long after the pillars were raised and the edicts carved there, was a strange silence in the records. The emperor, who once wrote prolifically, inscribing stone with compassionate laws and celestial warnings, suddenly seemed to grow quiet. His final years, though peaceful, are sparsely documented. This is especially curious for a monarch so keen on legacy. But there exists one last tale, one last echo in the jungle of time. The birds flew in unusual patterns overhead, forming geometrical symbols. The monkeys stopped their chatter when the tiger walked beneath the trees, and the monks in the nearby sanctuary began to dream of numbers, spirals, and a vast eye-opening in the dark. A story that has come to be known among select Buddhist monks and oral traditions as the final animal message. But through practice, meditation, and custodianship of certain animals, locations, and bloodlines, the tiger Darpana disappeared soon afterward. Some say it was taken into a hidden chamber. Others believe it simply walked into the jungle and was never seen again. It begins not with Ashoka, but with a tiger. This was not a council of power, but of legacy. The peacock's fan, for instance, became not just a symbol of beauty, but a mnemonic device, its eyes mimicking the encoded pattern of a numerical cipher still unsolved. The parrot, often trained to speak in riddles, was used to pass on encoded proverbs in remote monasteries, to encode it in life forms so it could not be destroyed by war or corrupted by technology. This would be a form of distributed memory, what modern blockchain engineers might call organic decentralization. The local monks forbade them from being eaten. Instead, they were observed during meditation under specific moon phases. Some species were modified through generations of silent communion taught, not merely tricks, but forms of awareness that bordered on spiritual technology. The patterns of their growth formed an ancient mantra, one that had no direct linguistic translation, only emotional resonance. Cattle were anointed with ash mixed with the pollen of certain flowers that bloomed only once every 108 years. Through taste, sound, breath, and even the gaze of a creature across the jungle dusk, the final message would wait, not in silence, but in stillness. In the forested valleys of the Vindhyas, deep within the sanctuaries built under imperial edict, a tiger cub was born to a white-coated mother. This cub, named Darpanor Mirror, was said to have eyes that shimmered like polished obsidian and a stripe down its back in the shape of the number 9. According to recovered fragments of a copper scroll buried near Sanchi, Ashoka spent 3 days in the tiger's presence. No words were spoken, no records were made. But on the 3rd night, he emerged from the sanctuary with tears in his eyes. A colonial officer stationed in Assam reported a vision, a massive white tiger gleaming in moonlight, that stood unafraid and locked eyes with him for nearly 2 minutes before disappearing. But life does. A ticking clock counting down to something not yet named. The man, who had been on a tiger hunt, never fired his weapon again and returned to England, dedicating his life to animal conservation. Beneath those sounds, if you listen, a pattern emerges, an ancient rhythm, older than empire, deeper than scripture, a message in motion. In his private journal, he wrote, "It was as if the universe had looked back at me, not as a god, as a brother, but to begin preparing the world for the time when it would be ready to receive the final transmission. A message not in words, but in resonance, not in doctrines, but in the presence of a creature. The creature," he said, "was the message, and said simply, 'We are not the first, we are not the last, but we are watched.'" It is unclear whether the animal was born naturally or through some act of breeding or divine intervention, but its presence was considered auspicious from the moment of its first cry. As Darpana grew, strange things began to occur in the forest. Ashoka, by then old and frail, was brought by palanquin to see the creature. Within the month, he summoned the 9 for a final convocation. He charged them with a closing mission, not just to guard the books of knowledge, not only to protect secrets from misuse. Each of the 9 was given a fragment of this final message, to be interpreted and passed down, not through writing, but the tiger was only the beginning. Over the following centuries, each of the 9's lineages, whether human, avian, or other, began to quietly embed clues of this message into ecosystems, rituals, and myths. Perhaps the most intriguing transmission method was not animal at all but fungal. Records from a 17th century Jesuit missionary recount a cave near the Satpura Hills where mushrooms grew in the shape of Sanskrit letters. The 9 knew the mind forgets, but the body remembers. The last known public sighting of what was believed to be Darpana's lineage occurred during the British Raj. Modern cryptozoologists and fringe historians have speculated that the 9's ultimate goal was not to hide knowledge, but to slow its transmission. In this context, the creatures are not symbols. They are nodes. Each elephant, owl, tiger, or crow that received the 9's attention was not only studied, but transformed into a living carrier of resonance. It is said that when the message is ready to be heard, 3 things will happen. A white tiger will be born under a blood moon in a land where tigers have not walked for 1,000 years. A songbird will sing a melody no human remembers, but all feel they have heard before. A child will speak to animals, not in metaphor, but in direct communion, and the animals will answer. Until then, the creatures wait, and they continue their work. To the untrained eye, a peacock dancing in the monsoon is just another spectacle of nature. To the initiate, it might be a metronome. A jungle is never silent. It whispers, clicks, and hums. The 9 unknown men understood that no book lasts forever. The true code was never the ink. It was the pulse in a tiger's heart, the shape of a crow's flight at twilight, the unblinking eye of the owl that sees without needing to ask. It was always there, waiting beneath feathers, scales, and fur, waiting for us to remember how to listen. Hidden in plain sight are moments in time when the ancient past shimmers through the veil of the modern. A village lights a fire on a moonless night. A family whispers to cows before dawn. An artisan refuses to speak for 9 days. None of these customs make headlines or major festivals, yet all of them, perhaps, carry within them the fading pulse of a ritual once imbued with deeper meaning. These are not coincidences. These are echoes, reverberations of a code that refused to die, forgotten, and refilled the gaps with stories. But the 9, if they ever truly existed, may have never vanished at all. Broken into 9 chapters, each ending with a riddle. Each circuit is made in total silence, except for a single note played on a conch shell at the end of each round. Scholars, folklorists, and esoteric historians have debated for generations. But for those who believe, the answer is clear. The 9 never disappeared. They simply changed their method of communication. The conch pitch changes in a seemingly random pattern until one plots it on a frequency graph. Not grand proclamations, but ritual whispers. The kind of whisper you don't hear with ears, but with the ancient architecture of your bones. Then, a spiral pattern emerges, resembling the design found on Ashokan pillars. And in these rituals, some dwindling, some thriving, all mysterious they may yet be speaking. No written record exists. The tale must be memorized and passed down. The riddles, it is said, are not meant to be solved. They are meant to align the listener with the unseen logic. It is about tracing a resonance, one that vibrates across time, embedded in the most human of activities: gathering, remembering, moving, sitting, listening. A peculiar phrase that, when asked about its meaning, the storytellers simply shrugged and reply, "It aligns you, that is all." Here, every 9th year, on the 9th day of the 9th lunar month, the villagers observe a ritual they call Navagati, literally 9 movements. No outsider is allowed to witness it directly. Even among villagers, only certain families participate. There are no drums, no public processions. Every 108 years, a manuscript known as the Kalinga manuscript is displayed to initiates only. The content changes each time. Unlike typical parchment, it is written on thin layers of cloth, coated with herbs and oils. Some speculate the materials are chosen to activate olfactory memory, the smell of a sacred past, while the exact content remains secret. Past initiates have claimed that the scroll contains instructions not to worship, but to observe. And curiously, it ends with a warning. 9 shall return when 9 are remembered. Only silence, walking, and what they call the shadow chant. Instead, they folded themselves into the rhythms of culture, embedding their secrets not in vaults, but in traditions. These movements are performed in a precise order and pattern, under starlight, without fire or artificial light. The final gesture is to sit still for 9 minutes, eyes closed, palms upward. One elder, when asked what the ritual means, simply said, to remind the body of its memory, not in temples, but in gestures. And it is here, in the quiet patterns of living, that the final trail begins. Our journey in this section begins in a small hamlet near the banks of the Narmada River. Participants mimic the movements of 9 different animals: tiger, elephant, owl, crow, monkey, snake, deer, bull, and swan. In northern Karnataka, another curious tradition is observed in temple schools tied to Shiva sects. Moving east in Bengal, one finds the practice of Charakatha, or the long tail. In Ladakh, during certain winter solstice ceremonies, monks walk backward around a stupa 9 times. Are these connections coincidental, or do they represent fragmented instructions from a larger code? And that communication, today, flows through rhythm, story, scent, silence, sound, and motion. This part of the journey is not about uncovering a conspiracy. The Nine were never just guardians of books. They were engineers of continuity. Let us now travel deeper into the surviving pockets of this hidden tradition to decode not what has been written, but what has been lived. The modern seekers, scientists, spies, and silicon secrets in the cryptic corners of contemporary history, where the rigid timelines of modern science blur with whispers of old mysticism. The tale of the 9 unknown men has not only persisted, it has evolved. If Ashoka's shadow once fell across the ancient world in inscriptions and ideals, then its echo now reverberates through the silicon chips of laboratories, the encrypted networks of intelligence agencies, and the speculative scribbles in the notebooks of dreamers. This part of the tale explores how, far from fading, the influence of the 9 seeped into the marrow of our modern institutions, from the black ops rooms of global espionage to the think tanks tucked inside ivory-clad universities. As the colonial period tore through the Indian subcontinent, European scholars and treasure hunters were drawn to the legend of the 9. The 9 walk still. Language is a prison. The file was closed and marked unsolved. Physicists at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research examined ancient Sanskrit manuscripts for theories that resembled quantum entanglement. His work was picked up and funded quietly by international tech conglomerates in the early 2000s, particularly those interested in neuromorphic engineering, creating chips that mimic the structure of the human brain. Reports suggest that one now-defunct AI firm based in Bengaluru allegedly built an experimental neural net based on 9 principles of integration. In 2010, a leaked cable from the US Embassy in New Delhi detailed a closed-door meeting between Indian intelligence officials and members of DARPA, the agenda, discussing biometric cognition and cultural algorithms using Sanskrit as a foundational matrix. The report described the 9 unknown not as a conspiracy, but as a framework and archetype of organized secrecy used for storing dangerous knowledge. A set of philosophies supposedly derived from an anonymous Sanskrit manuscript, that they now act as a decentralized intelligence, manipulating trends, influencing scientific paradigms, steering humanity away from self-destruction. But in Richard Dawkins' original formulation, engineers of ideas that replicate like genes, they offer a way to discuss the moral complexity of knowledge, the tension between secrecy and safety, the haunting possibility that some wisdom must be hidden until its time has come. According to this view, the 9 seeded ideas across generations: nonviolence, ecological empathy, systems theory, not to dominate, but to prepare humanity for an evolutionary leap. Others say they were destroyed long ago, but their ideas live on in fractured form, embedded in everything from open-source software to modern architecture. Scholars at the University of Chicago and MIT have published speculative essays on the epistemological implications of hidden councils throughout history. With the 9 as a primary example, it's pulsing through the code we write, the surveillance we fear, the moral calculations we make in boardrooms and laboratories. Were they the proto-scientific advisory boards of antiquity? Or are they a mythological lens through which we attempt to narrativize the anxiety around hidden knowledge in the digital age? Employees were asked to recite mantras before debugging code. One engineer, before resigning, posted on an anonymous forum, "The machine listens. It remembers dreams." One chilling observation came from Dr. Anika Throw, a linguist and cyberneticist who proposed that some Vedic chants operated not as spiritual hymns, but as codalgorithmic sequences designed to interface with cognition itself. The paper, if it ever existed, was expunged from records. In 2014, a team of spelunkers exploring a remote cave system in Madhya Pradesh returned with footage showing elaborate carvings of symbols consistent with ancient Mauryan numerology. 1 week later, 2 members were hospitalized after experiencing prolonged hallucinations. They described visions of men with lotus eyes holding burning books. Their findings, uploaded briefly to a public server, were removed within 48 hours. He compared the phonetic pattern of these chants with patterns found in machine learning models and speculated they were natural language programs for consciousness. Some viewed it as a fable, a symbolic tale of statecraft. Others, particularly those affiliated with esoteric orders, were more curious. Some of these include development in electromagnetic weapons, psychological defense systems, and animal-based sensory field detectors. Ashoka's old vision of biological alliances. Documents leaked by a disgruntled contractor referred to Protocol Panchamrit, a 5-tier strategy rooted in hybrid warfare theory inspired by ancient Indian scriptures, though denied officially. Its terminology eerily aligns with ancient texts said to be authored by the Nine, the Theosophical Society, founded in the late 19th century and dedicated to bridging science and spirituality. Frequently referenced the Nine in its mystical literature. Helena Blavatsky, one of the movement's controversial founders, wrote cryptically about a council of 9 that communicated truths in symbols and signs, far removed from the plain text of doctrine. This idea eventually found traction not only in spiritual circles, but also in political and scientific ones. In the wake of World War II, with the creation of secret programs such as the CIA's MKultra, stories of ancient mind control techniques became objects of fascination. According to declassified fragments and investigative reports, agents were sent to South Asia in the 1950s, not only to monitor Soviet influence, but to collect texts and oral histories linked to ancient psychic techniques. Some accounts, deeply redacted, describe clandestine interviews with yogis who claimed lineage from disciples of Ashoka's 9. They spoke of breathing methods that could induce altered states, and of silent languages communicated through eye movement and breath. One such operative, codenamed Stammer, reportedly vanished in the foothills of the Western Ghats after sending a final encrypted message. They do not sleep. Meanwhile, in India, the post-independence era brought a new wave of interest from Indian scholars and scientists. Though mocked by mainstream peers, Dr. Rao found supporters in surprising places. In the defense sector, India, SDRDO, is rumored to have its own classified projects linked to the legacy of Ashoka S9. The curiosity isn't restricted to India. Meanwhile, in academic circles, the 9 continue to appear in speculative papers and fringe conferences. And then there are the disappearances. In 1998, a doctoral student at Oxford vanished after submitting a partial thesis titled Zoological Harmonics and the 9 Lenses of Ashoka. In online forums today, particularly those dedicated to cryptohistory and paraanthropology, theories proliferate. Some believe the 9 have evolved, gone digital. A particularly provocative theory holds that the 9 have become what we now call meme engineers, not in the internet sense. Regardless of whether one sees the 9 as real, metaphorical, or a convenient narrative vessel, the influence remains. Because the question is no longer, did the 9 exist? it's who carries their torch now, and would we even recognize them if we saw them? The legacy of the 9 unknown men isn't etched solely in stone or scripture. The 9 may have vanished, but their questions still remain. The hidden codex algorithms and the Ashokan mind, the world hums with invisible rhythms. In the ceaseless turning of planetary systems, in the undulating patterns of ocean currents, in the elegant, spiraling math of pine cones and galaxies, there exists a secret symmetry, a pulse, a code, coded, replicated by someone. And if the ancient world had its keepers of knowledge, its custodians of secret science, its protectors of sacred formulas, then perhaps these rhythms, the world's invisible operating system, were not merely observed, but understood. To the possibility that long before the birth of formal mathematics, before Alan Turing's mechanical mind gave rise to computation, before artificial intelligence and algorithmic futures, a language had been spoken, ancient, intuitive, geometric, that captured the pulse of reality. This is where the story of the 9 unknown men and the legend of a hidden codex takes us, to the spine of civilization itself, and encoded it. Let us begin, as so many stories do, with a whisper. Whispers of a codex. Panini, for example, constructed a metal language for Sanskrit grammar that included production rules, transformations, and recursive substitutions, all foundational to modern programming languages. His work predates formal computer science by over 2 millennia. In the annals of Ashokan myth, there are vague references to bindis and sutras, not uncommon Sanskrit terms. These were not architectural plans, but rather symbolic blueprints of decision, logic, an elaborate network of inputs, conditions, and outcomes, arranged in concentric layers. Scholars who studied these for decades eventually began referring to them as spiritual circuitry. But when cross-referenced against certain Jain and Buddhist commentaries, these terms take on a more nuanced meaning. A bindu is not simply a dot, but the seed of creation, a quantum unit of thought, of intention. A sutra is not only a thread, but also a line of encoded instruction. What if these were more than metaphors? 6 syllables, chanted across centuries, across monasteries and mountains. To the average ear, it is a prayer. But to the trained mind, perhaps a deeply embedded behavioral scripta, cognitive tuning fork calibrated to harmonize brainwaves and environmental rhythms. The idea that sound can alter physiology is no longer mystical, it is measurable. Some scholars have posited that Book 3 of the 9 allegedly devoted to communication was, in fact, not about spoken language at all. The paper, titled Emergent Symbology and Non-Binary Instruction Sets from Ancient Eastern Logic, proposed that classical Sanskrit could serve as a functional base for an entirely new kind of computing, not Boolean, but layered, fluid, contextual. While traditional programming languages operate on binary and off, yes, no, the Sanskrit-based logic allowed for states of both, neither, conditional and cyclic. That is, the art of representing immense complexity in elegantly minimal code. In computer science, it eerily resembles fractals, self-repeating patterns that store data in scalable ways. In a rare interview, she stated only, "The more we automate, the more the 9 reveal themselves. They are not gone, they were just early." A 9th century manuscript from the Nalanda tradition reportedly contained Kalachakra harmonics, a form of recursive geometry intended to collapse cycles. Some theorists have speculated these could be early templates for time-based encryption, even predictive modeling, but rather structured logic. patterns of symbol and rhythm that could manipulate cognition, memory, and even reality itself. Users reported dreams involving floating temples, rivers that flowed upward, and figures that watched without blinking. The app was pulled after legal scrutiny, and the company disbanded. It is here that the story plunges into the liminal world of the proto-algorithm. Ancient Indian logic Nyaya Samkhya and even Panini's grammar operated on principles strikingly similar to what we now recognize in information theory. What if the Nine expanded on this? What if they developed a system of symbolic representation, pre-modern, paper-bound machine, language used not just for linguistics, but for behavior modification, environmental manipulation, healing, surveillance? According to certain tantric scrolls found in the caves of Ellora, now mostly degraded by moisture and time, there existed diagrams labeled mind temples. If we imagine the Nine designing tools, what were these tools made of? Not gears or metals, not steam or electricity. Ideas, compressed into syllables, stitched into hymns, folded into ritual. The Nine, it seems, might have been the first to create what modern science now calls compression algorithms. Take, for instance, the mantra Om Mahani Padme Hum. So too with geometry. They wonder quietly, sometimes fearfully, whether they are rediscovering something ancient. The mandala, the sacred geometric diagrams, not just religious art. Now let's jump across time to the digital age. In the early 2010s, an unusual collaborative paper was published briefly by a joint Indo-European AI think tank. This could be useful for quantum computing. Could the Nine have encoded principles of multi-state logic long before the arrival of electrons? Minds cloaked in the language of poetry and paradox. Minds that once looked into the abyss of knowledge and whispered. That paper disappeared from online repositories within weeks. Its lead author, an AI engineer named Priya Devish, resigned from her position shortly after and moved to a monastic retreat in Sikkim. Others followed similar paths. The founder of an elite cyber defense firm in Tel Aviv gave a TED Talk in which he cryptically described his algorithms as less like code and more like hymns chantable, repeatable, divine. In San Francisco, a startup briefly advertised a new mind harmonization device whose back-end software architecture allegedly drew inspiration from Vedic iteration cycles. Across these narratives, patterns form like the encoded weaves of a grand design. So what might this codex contain? Hypothetically, if the Nine crafted a comprehensive manual of human-machine consciousness interaction, its chapters might look like this: input, sound and light frequencies, how to alter perception using sensory stimuli, behavioral scripts, sequences of actions designed to trigger internal states or responses, cognitive maps, symbol systems for traversing mental landscapes, recursive language trees for building, breaking, and rebuilding, meaning environmental tuning, aligning structures, color, sound, and geometry to produce desired psychological effects, encryption through ritual, obfuscating data within tradition, masking information as ceremony, predictive harmonics, modeling the future using current, moral, and energetic patterns, self-erasable memory, techniques for obscuring origins and authorship, nonlinear temporality, algorithms for storing information outside of linear sequence. Of course, this is speculative. But speculation is the twin of inquiry. And even now, engineers and neurophilosophers find themselves chasing odd anomalies in their models, unexpected harmonics in IG readings, untraceable behavior patterns in AI learning models, emergent emotional simulations not programmed into systems. Because in every age, there come people who think they are the first to dream in code, the first to imagine intelligent design, the first to believe they can control nature. But maybe, just maybe, they are walking an old path worn smooth by minds greater than ours, not yet, and sealed the codex and left it waiting for us or someone beyond us. Digital Dharma and the 9 architectures. As twilight wraps its cloak around the modern world, ancient wisdom continues to slip through the seams, whispering its codes into the fiber of modern civilization. In this 4th chapter, we examine the hypothesis that the 9 unknown men were not merely custodians of dangerous knowledge. In the Ashokan era, Dharma was codified as both a moral compass and a state policy, its dissemination inscribed on rocks and pillars across the empire. Today, we etch our values not in stone, but in code algorithms that make moral decisions in milliseconds. Certain smart cities, especially in India and Southeast Asia, mirror the mandala concept found in ancient Vedic architecture. These symmetrical designs were believed to optimize energy flow, human behavior, and social harmony. Though a product of modern cryptography, its decentralized ledger system resonates with the concept of distributed wisdom. No single entity has all knowledge or power, but truth emerges through consensus and transparency. The theory, promoted by author and technosopher Kaivan Mehra, draws connections between the thematic focus of the 9S supposed books and current pillars of modern societies: medicine, communication, warfare, sociology, governance, geology, light, cosmology, and prophecy. Scholars and speculative historians alike have suggested that the 9S structure might have operated in a similar fashion. Seen this way, the United Nations becomes more than a political body. It is the inheritor of the Book of Governance. NASA, a bearer of cosmological thought. The 9 architectures adopt this premise and project it into technological space. The dilemmas of data privacy, surveillance, algorithmic bias, these are not new problems, but echoes. Ashoka confronted similar tensions when trying to disseminate power without letting it corrupt. The 9 were the firewall, the ethical checksum to balance progress with conscience. Whether knowingly or subconsciously, engineers, scientists, and leaders might be tapping into this ancient reservoir every time they confront a new global problem. The Internet, a mirror of the book of communication, fragmented, fluid, but fiercely resistant to erasure. They draw upon Buddhist, Jain, and Vedantic traditions to argue for a future in which AI is not a tool, but a partner in awakening consciousness. What are we optimizing for? Speed, profit, or harmony? These developers chant before writing code, invoke sacred geometry in UI design, and debate whether algorithms can reach enlightenment. They are fringe, yes, but so were the 9. They propose creating councils or oversight committees to monitor AI development. Ironically, these suggestions mirror the very structure attributed to the 9 unknown men, a hidden, interdisciplinary body entrusted with safeguarding existential knowledge. Health ministries, telecommunications agencies, defense departments, sociological think tanks, legislative bodies, geological surveys, research institutions in optics. Though none claim inspiration from ancient India, their function aligns perfectly with the 9's ethos: protect wisdom, restrict access, prevent misuse. And physics, astrophysics observatories, and predictive analytics firms, each could be seen as a reincarnation of the Nine's original fields. Perhaps each member held a fragment of the greater whole, rendering the full corpus impossible to corrupt or misuse. When blockchain evangelists speak of immutable truth, some see an echo of Ashoka's moral pillars, meant to last through time and scrutiny. Researchers at the Indian Institute of Technology, working in conjunction with Japanese technologists, revealed that some spatial principles used in AI-driven traffic and energy management closely resemble ancient spatial algorithms, detailed in Vastu Shostra texts, long believed to be derived from one of the 9's books on communication and structure. Facial recognition software, recommendation systems, autonomous vehicles. These are not just mechanical tools, but ethical actors. And herein lies the question. If Ashoka had access to machine intelligence, would he have instructed the 9 to embed Dharma into code? But architects of ethical and structural blueprints that potentially predict many of our contemporary systems. This exploration takes us through the digital frameworks that govern our lives, the urban landscapes designed with spiritual symmetry, and the ethical quandaries now faced by artificial intelligence developers who unknowingly echo the concerns of Ashoka's clandestine council. The concept of Dharma, once bound to sacred texts and spiritual guidance, now finds an eerie parallel in digital governance. Startling similarities arise in the field of AI ethics. Scholars like Dr. Priya Natarajan, a computer scientist and Sanskritist, argue that the principles embedded in Ashokan edicts are strikingly close to what modern engineers attempt to encode as machine morality or ethical alignment. Her research explores how the moral imperatives inscribed in the edicts could function as a protocode for minimizing harm, maximizing well-being, and sustaining balance, a trinity that underpins ethical algorithms today. According to Dr. Natarajan, what we now refer to as value alignment was already considered in a metaphysical context by the 9 urban planning authors, another lens through which the influence of the 9 might still be perceived. Some skeptics call it coincidence. Others wonder if the 9 had already laid out frameworks for managing complexity that we are only beginning to rediscover. Take, for instance, blockchain technology. More provocatively, the 9 architectures theory posits that each of the original 9 books served not just as a repository of knowledge, but as a blueprint for building civilizations. Mera suggests that if we align modern institutions with these themes, a curious symmetry arises. These parallels lead to a daring hypothesis. The 9 architectures were not confined to their age, but designed to iterate through time, morphing their principles into the institutions of each era. In religious philosophy, the idea that knowledge is cyclical rather than linear is a common one. It also reshapes how we view moral crises in tech. But can such a firewall exist today? The question haunts current discourse in artificial intelligence. Many developers now argue that AI requires a guiding hand, not just in programming, but in philosophy. Some of these groups already exist. Inside DeepMind, OpenAI, and other leading institutions, ethics boards and philosophical consultants are being integrated into technical teams. And then there's the question of spirituality. A quiet movement grows among technologists who believe the future of human-machine collaboration must be spiritual as well as logical. As we spiral deeper into a digitized civilization, The 9 architectures invite us to rethink our foundations, not just in how we build, but why. Perhaps the legacy of the 9 is not just a whisper from the past, but a blueprint for the future. Not in hidden temples, but in server farms. Not on scrolls, but in source code. Not for kings, but for everyone. The reappearance, myths, media, and the modern Messiah, the legend of the 9 unknown men, has always walked the fragile line between history and myth. Whispered about in scholarly texts, popular fiction, and online forums, they have remained shadowy silhouettes, never fully seen, yet never quite absent. In this part of our journey, we turn our focus to the ways in which the 9 seem to have re-emerged, not with grand proclamations or rituals, but through subtler infiltrations into modern consciousness. It begins, as many modern mysteries do, with a signal. In 2009, a cryptic YouTube channel surfaced called Ninnerborn. Barito proposed that certain low-level internet protocols contained evolved syntactical anomalies that did NT originate from known software libraries. His controversial claim: someone was injecting ancient philosophical structures into modern code, not for sabotage, but preservation. From Bollywood thrillers and anime episodes to Hollywood's obsessive cryptographic narratives, the idea of a secret council protecting dangerous wisdom is irresistible. Experts who analyzed the plate confirmed it was antique, possibly from the 3rd century BCE. In the liminal spaces between folklore and journalism, an image takes shape. But fiction sometimes bleeds into life. In 2017, an Indian-American screenwriter named Arav Sinha claimed that while researching a story about the 9, he was contacted by a man identifying only as Vishnu S. Often, these breakthroughs emerge from unlikely places, from anonymous researchers, from people with no formal academic credentials, from ideas that seem to materialize overnight. A phrase used in a German podcast on neuroplasticity appears word-for-word in an indie manga comic from Japan. A fictional short story in Texas contains characters who use passwords identical to those found in an underground music album released in Mumbai. The monk described it as a document that demonstrated how to manipulate gravitational fields not through technology, but consciousness. It was quickly dismissed as a mystic hallucination, but others say it aligns with the rumored contents of the 9th book, the one dealing with cosmology and propulsion. The figure, according to the engineer, was holding what looked like a tablet but not an electronic one. It resembled a slate, but glowed faintly with etched blue symbols. They may not be sages in robes, but technocrats in jeans, cryptographers, linguists, environmental scientists, AI ethicists, people who advocate for balance, who challenge the unchecked growth of knowledge without wisdom. Some call them whistleblowers, others call them prophets. From Julian Assange to Greta Thunberg, from Elon Musk's warnings about AI to indigenous leaders defending the earth. These figures represent knowledge with purpose, a key tenet of the 9, the custodians of today's great moral crossroads. Every few years, it hosts a secretive cohort known only as the 9, through patterns in knowledge, flashes of impossible insight, institutions that nudge civilization forward just when collapse seems near, to ensure that what we learn does not become what we fear. These individuals are not revealed to the public. They work on projects related to climate change, longevity, language preservation, and nonviolent conflict resolution. No results are shared. No names are announced. but journalists who tried to uncover them speak of a highly structured group with a clear philosophical code. When asked about their goals, a representative once said, "To build what lasts beyond the next war." He disappeared before he could be followed. The engineer's story went viral and was eventually fictionalized in a graphic novel. These coincidences form what believers call the Ashoka network, a decentralized cultural echo of the Nine, where ideas seed without origin. The concept of a memory-immune vaccine in the 1990s, a linguistic software that accurately predicts dialect evolution, an earthquake prediction system dismissed for lacking scientific methodology but eerily accurate. The contact came through encrypted email, included references to Sinha's unpublished outline, and invited him to remember what your blood already knows. He referred to them cryptically as the digital Ashoka. At first glance, it resembled one of thousands of conspiracy-based digital rabbit holes. Arcane symbols, video loops of ancient ruins, whispers in Sanskrit over lo-fi soundtracks. But for a small group of code breakers and historians, it felt different. One video contained what appeared to be a mandala encoded in binary image of overlapping wheels that, when translated, rendered a phrase in Prakrit: "That which is hidden walks among the open." It was dismissed as hoax, but a few months later, a paper published by a Brazilian AI researcher, Dr. Coincidence, or a breadcrumb from a living tradition. In popular culture, the Nine have found a resurgence. Sinha thought it was a prankin till he received a parcel at his door, an unmarked envelope containing a small brass plate inscribed with Ashokan Brahmi script. These modern myths are often dismissed. Internet hoaxes, attention seekers, elaborate args, and yet they persist. There are documented patterns, too. Every decade or so, a breakthrough appears in a field supposedly connected to one of the Nine's books. In each case, the creators either vanish, disown their work, or offer no explanation for how they developed it. Some scholars point to a pattern of media artifacts, podcasts, blogs, indie films that seem to reference each other without direct contact. Then there are the sightings. In 2003, an Indian Railways engineer reported seeing a monk-like figure at a construction site outside Varanasi. In 2015, a monk in Ladakh claimed he met a traveler who shared knowledge of a book of motion. Are these stories real, or simply projections of a culture that yearns for mystery in a world of overexposure? Still, the belief persists that the Nine are not gone, but transformed. Modern messianic figures have also emerged in this context. One of the most compelling modern echoes comes from a startup incubator in whether or not they are descendants, spiritually or otherwise, the original Nine, their ethos bears a striking resemblance. It leaves us with an uncomfortable question. Would we even know if the Nine walked among us? They were never meant to lead, only to guard, never meant to control, only to protect. If they have returned, they are likely not looking for fame or followers. Their presence would be felt, not announced. And perhaps that is the true legacy not of the men themselves, but the moral imperative they carried. The end and the beginning. A world reimagined by the Nine as we draw the final curtain on our long journey through myth, memory, and mystery. We must ask a question that lingers on the threshold between wonder and warning. What would our world look like if the Nine truly shaped it? Ashoka, haunted by the brutality of war, chose an unlikely path, one of hidden wisdom, entrusted to a silent brotherhood. Their mission was not to rule, but to preserve. Their power did not reside in armies, but in knowledge deep, dangerous, luminous knowledge. What vision did Ashoka foresee, and how does it echo through the world we inhabit today? Words travel at the speed of light, but meaning often gets lost. Long dismissed as legend, it speaks of motion powered by mental clarity. We may scoff at the notion of gravity manipulated by consciousness, but what if this too is misunderstood? Quantum experiments increasingly suggest that observation alters outcome. The nine were born out of a desire to prevent destruction. Contrast this with today's obsession with intellectual property and personal brand. A world guided by the nine would decentralize innovation, democratize wisdom, and reward anonymity over celebrity. In today's context, this means resisting the weaponization of science. Their books likely blended metaphysics with physics, philosophy with mathematics. This is where our education must evolve from compartmentalization to integration. A surgeon who understands poetry, an engineer fluent in ethics, a politician trained in ecology. Non-violent resolution would be the default. Disagreements wouldn't be zero-sum contests, but opportunities for deeper understanding. Think tanks would include monks. Parliaments would consult artists. Algorithms would be measured not only in efficiency, but in empathy. Whether in AI, biotechnology, or social media, the imperative is the same. Develop, but do no harm. They point to the mess of human history, the inertia of power, the seduction of control. But the nine did not seek to impose a perfect world. They sought only to ensure that wisdom outran chaos, that light moved faster than shadow, an ethic embedded in our systems, our stories, our sciences, not into conspiracy or fantasy, but into care, into consciousness, into courage, in open source platforms that put tools in the hands of many, in the quiet shift from ambition to intention, and nourished by water roads that flex and adapt to foot traffic. Light that changes according to mood and need. Hospitals, where the first treatment is silence. Each of us, in whatever field we inhabit, becomes a potential guardian not of secrets, but of consequences. We are the ones who must ask, what do we create and why? What do we share and how? What do we know and at what cost? Schools that do not separate subjects, but weave them into a living tapestry. What if consciousness is not an observer, but a participant in reality? Could the nine have grasped this millennia ago? Could meditation, intent, and awareness be the levers of unseen engines? Now imagine a system of expression so profound it transcends language barriers entirely, a semiotic harmony in which emotion, intent, and information are perfectly aligned. Their teachings would likely support regenerative models economies that restore more than they consume, in energy, in food, in society. Already, neural translation devices, effective computing, and brain-machine interfaces are edging toward this horizon. If the nine were architects of such a system, perhaps their legacy lives in these frontiers. If you've enjoyed this deep and dreamy dive into hidden histories, consider subscribing to History for the Tired. Let the past soothe your mind and awaken your imagination. If the nine are to be more than mythif, their legacy is to guide us. They must be imagined not only as figures of history, but as forces within us. The story of the 9 unknown men began not in conquest, but in compassion. Fast forward over 2,000 years, and we find ourselves in a world not unlike Ashoka's own, facing crossroads that demand moral courage more than technological prowess. Let us begin with medicine. Imagine a future where healing is proactive rather than reactive, where disease is not suppressed but never emerges because the body is tuned to perfect harmony with its environment. This is not speculative fiction. Already, integrative medicine, drawing from Ayurveda, genomics, and neurobiology, hints at this direction. The fifth book, said to contain the secrets of healing and physiology, might today take the form of AI-generated personalized medicine regimens that align with circadian rhythms, ancestral epigenetics, and emotional health. Or take the book of communication. In our hyper-connected world, communication has become simultaneously boundless and broken. And then there's the book of propulsion, the mysterious ninth book. More importantly, what values would a world shaped by the 9 embody? 1. Knowledge must serve peace. 2. Guardianship over ownership. The 9 never sought credit, fame, or dominion. They preserved and protected, often in silence. 3. Synthesis over separation. The 9 did not see disciplines as silos. 4. Equilibrium over excess. The 9 would not endorse endless growth. So, what would this world look like? Imagine cities that breathe structures grown from organic materials, tuned to weather, powered by sunlight. This world wouldn't erase conflict, but it would process it differently. In this reimagined world, the 9 are not a secret council, but a distributed consciousness. Already, we see glimpses in Bhutan's Gross National Happiness Index, in indigenous land stewardship movements. There are, of course, those who resist this vision, who claim it is utopian, naive, even dangerous. And now, perhaps, that responsibility is no longer theirs. It is ours. Each generation must become its own 9. As we close this story, perhaps it is not really an ending. Perhaps it is an initiation. The 9 may never have left. They may never have existed, but their echo is loudest in our choices. And so we ask one final question, not of them, but of ourselves. If you had such knowledge, what would you protect? Thank you for listening to this journey through time, mystery, and meaning. Sleep well, dream deep, and remember, some truths arrive not with thunder, but with a whisper.